Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The dispatcher's console glowed softly in the darkened communications center of the Metro West Police Department. Officer Sarah Chen had been working the graveyard shift for 3 years, but tonight felt different. The usual ambient noise of radio chatter and keyboard clicks seemed muted, almost oppressive in the early morning hours. The building itself seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating something significant was about to unfold. Sarah adjusted her headset and glanced at the duty roster displayed on her secondary monitor. 4 patrol units were active in her sector: Units 23, 47, 89, and 112. Unit 23 was Officer Mike Rodriguez, a 7-year veteran with a reputation for thoroughness and calm under pressure. Unit 47 housed Officer Janet Walsh, newer to the force but already showing promise as a reliable backup officer. Unit 89 was staffed by Officers Thompson and Martinez, partners who specialized in domestic violence and stalking cases. Unit 112 contained Officer David Kim, working solo tonight and covering the eastern edge of the sector. It had been a relatively quiet night for a Tuesday in November. The call log showed a few domestic disturbance calls, one resolved peacefully with mediation, another resulting in a night in jail for an intoxicated husband who had threatened his wife. There had been one DUI stop on Maple Avenue that resulted in an arrest, and a broken streetlight complaint on Cedar Street that had been forwarded to the city maintenance department. Nothing out of the ordinary for a weeknight in the suburbs. The weather had been unseasonably cold for November, with temperatures dropping into the low 30s, and a light dusting of snow that had begun falling around midnight. The roads were still clear, but the precipitation was making visibility challenging for the patrol officers. Sarah had been monitoring weather updates and road conditions throughout the shift, ready to adjust response protocols if conditions deteriorated. The digital clock on her workstation read 2:47:23 a.m. when Line 3 lit up with an incoming 911 call. Sarah had learned to read the subtle variations in how emergency calls presented themselves. The urgent double ring that indicated automatic routing from cell towers, the steady single tone of landline calls, the distinctive pattern that suggested calls from institutional phones like hospitals or schools. This was a landline call, which was becoming increasingly rare in an era of cell phone dominance. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah answered, her voice steady and professional despite the late hour. She had answered thousands of emergency calls during her 3 years on night shift, and she had learned to project calm authority even when her own adrenaline was spiking. Heavy breathing filled her earpiece, followed by what sounded like muffled movement. The caller was trying to whisper, but the connection carried an undertone of static that suggested the call might be originating from an older phone system. Sarah could hear what sounded like fabric rustling, possibly someone moving around in a confined space. "Please, someone's in my house," came a trembling female voice. "They're inside. I can hear them downstairs." The fear in the woman's voice was unmistakable, but Sarah had been trained to distinguish between genuine emergency situations and calls that might be influenced by mental health issues, substance abuse, or domestic disputes. The woman sounded coherent and specific about her concern, which suggested a legitimate emergency situation. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She began typing the incident report into her computer system while keeping her voice calm and reassuring. The call would be automatically recorded, and her incident report would create a permanent record of the emergency response. "Ma'am, I need you to stay on the line with me. Can you tell me your address?" 1247 Henderson Street, apartment 3B. "Please hurry, I think they're coming upstairs." Henderson Street. Sarah knew that area well from her 3 years of dispatching calls to that sector. It was an older residential area with a mix of single-family homes and converted apartment buildings. The neighborhood wasn't the best in the city, but it wasn't the worst either. Property values were moderate, and the crime rate was typical for suburban areas. Mostly property crimes, occasional domestic disputes, but rare, violent crimes. 1247 Henderson Street specifically was a 3-story brick building that had been converted from a single-family mansion into 6 apartment units in the 1970s. Sarah recalled previous calls to that address. A noise complaint about 6 months ago, a medical emergency for an elderly resident about a year ago, and a burglary report that had turned out to be a case of a tenant locking themselves out. The building was generally quiet and well-maintained. She quickly pulled up the location on her mapping system while simultaneously preparing to key her radio. The computer showed detailed information about the address, building layout, previous call history, known residents, and any special considerations for emergency responders. Apartment 3B was listed as occupied by Lisa Morrison, age 34, with a notation that she had been recently widowed. "All units, we have a priority 1 call. Possible home invasion in progress at 1247 Henderson Street, apartment 3B. Caller reports intruders inside the residence. Units 23 and 47, please respond code 3. The response was immediate, as Sarah had expected. Unit 23's voice crackled through the radio within seconds. Unit 23, show me responding code 3 to 1247 Henderson Street. ETA 4 minutes. Unit 47, I'm backing up Unit 23. ETA 5 minutes, came Officer Walsh's voice. Sarah made note of the response times and returned her attention to the caller, who was still on the line but breathing heavily. She could hear background sounds that were consistent with someone hiding in a small space. Muffled acoustic quality, occasional fabric rustling, and what might have been the sound of someone shifting position to remain comfortable while staying hidden. "Ma'am, are you still there? I have officers on the way. Where are you in the apartment right now?" I'm in the bedroom closet. I locked the bedroom door, but I can hear them moving around down there. Oh God, I think they're on the stairs now." The fear in the woman's voice was palpable, and Sarah could hear it too through the phone. Creaking sounds in the background that were consistent with someone moving cautiously up wooden steps. Old buildings like 1247 Henderson Street often had wooden staircases that creaked under weight, and the sound carried well through the building's older construction. "What's your name, ma'am?" Lisa Morrison. "Please, they're getting closer. I can see light under the door moving around." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, updating the incident log with real-time information. She activated the emergency protocol, which would automatically record the entire call for evidence purposes and alert the supervisory staff to monitor the situation. The protocol also enabled GPS tracking of responding units and provided real-time updates to hospital emergency departments in case medical assistance became necessary. "Lisa, I need you to stay as quiet as possible. Don't hang up the phone. Officers are almost there. Can you tell me anything about the intruders? How many people?" I think there are 2 of them, maybe 3. I heard voices when they first broke in, but now they're being quiet. The front door lock was broken. I heard it splinter." The mention of voices and a broken door lock provided important tactical information for the responding officers. Sarah made detailed notes about the number of suspects and their method of entry. home invasions involving multiple suspects required different response protocols than single-perpetrator burglaries. The dispatcher's training had prepared Sarah for many scenarios, but home invasion calls always carried a particular weight. The victims were trapped, vulnerable, and entirely dependent on law enforcement's response time. Every second counted, and the psychological pressure on both the victim and the dispatcher was intense. Sarah had handled dozens of burglary calls during her career, but active home invasions with victims still inside were relatively rare and always high-stress situations. Lisa, I need you to describe exactly what you heard when they broke in. This information will help the officers understand what they're dealing with. It was like a loud crack. Then the door slammed against the wall. I heard at least 2 different voices, men's voices, but they were whispering so I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then I heard footsteps moving around downstairs like they were searching through rooms. Sarah made note of the details while monitoring the approaching units on her computer screen. Unit 23 was now 2 minutes out. Unit 47, 3 minutes. The response time was good for their sector, but in a home invasion scenario, even minutes could feel like hours for both the victim and the dispatcher. Are there any weapons in the house, Lisa? Anything the intruders might have access to? My husband. My late husband kept a gun in the nightstand, but I moved it after he died. It's locked in a safe now. I don't think they could get to it. Late husband. That detail triggered something in Sarah's dispatcher instincts that had been honed by 3 years of experience and extensive training in criminal behavior patterns. Recent widows were often targeted by criminals who assumed they would be vulnerable and less likely to have security measures in place. Sarah had handled several cases where criminals had specifically targeted households where they knew a male presence had been recently removed. When did your husband pass away, Lisa? 3 weeks ago. Car accident on I-95. He was coming home from his night shift at Riverside Manufacturing Plant. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November weather outside. 3 weeks was exactly the kind of time frame criminals use to case a target, after learning about a death through obituaries, public records, or even social media posts. The timing suggested this might not be a random break-in. Lisa, in the past few weeks, have you noticed anyone unusual around your building? Any maintenance workers, delivery people, or strangers who seem to be paying attention to your comings and goings? Maybe. There was a man I saw a couple times near the parking area. Middle-aged, always wearing a baseball cap. I thought he might be a new tenant, but I never saw him actually go into any apartment. This information was crucial. Sarah immediately added it to her incident report and prepared to relay the description to the responding officers. If this was a targeted attack rather than a random burglary, the perpetrators might have vehicles in the area or planned escape routes. Unit 23 reported pulling onto Henderson Street. Officer Rodriguez's voice came through clearly on the radio. Dispatch, Unit 23 on scene at Henderson Street. Building appears dark. No obvious signs of forced entry visible from the front. No vehicles parked illegally or suspiciously in the immediate area. Copy, Unit 23. Caller is still online. Reports intruders have moved to the 2nd floor. She's hiding in the bedroom closet of apartment 3B. Be advised, caller previously observed suspicious male in baseball cap in the area. Unit 47. I'm taking position at the rear of the building. No movement visible from back windows, but I can see that several ground floor windows have been left open despite the cold weather. Sarah updated her incident log with the officer's observations while maintaining contact with Lisa. The open windows in cold weather could indicate that the intruders had prepared multiple escape routes, or it might be unrelated to the current incident. Lisa, the officers are at your building now. They're going to enter and come find you. I need you to stay exactly where you are until they identify themselves to you directly. Do not come out for anyone who doesn't specifically identify themselves as police officers." "Okay, but..." I can still hear them moving around. It sounds like they're in the living room now, going through things. I hear drawers opening and closing, and it sounds like they're moving furniture. This was consistent with a burglary, but something felt off to Sarah. Most burglars worked quickly and fled at the first sign of police presence. The fact that they were still actively searching while sirens would have been audible outside suggested either extreme desperation or unfamiliarity with normal criminal behavior patterns. Unit 23, be advised, caller reports ongoing sounds of searching on the first floor. Subjects may still be actively inside the building. Copy, dispatch. We're making entry through the front door now. Sarah could hear Officer Rodriguez's voice change to the focused, alert tone that officers used when entering potentially dangerous situations. The next few minutes would be critical. The period when officers made contact with armed intruders was statistically the most dangerous time in home invasion responses. Unit 23 reported making entry through the front door. Officer Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with controlled urgency. "Dispatch, Unit 23 inside the building. Confirming forced entry. Front door frame is splintered. Looks recent. We can hear movement from upper floors. Unit 47 in position at rear exit. I have visual on the back stairwell through a window. No movement visible." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she monitored both the radio traffic and Lisa's phone call simultaneously. This was the most dangerous phase of the response. Officers were inside the building with potentially armed intruders, and the victim was still hiding upstairs. "Lisa, the officers are inside the building now. Can you still hear the intruders?" "Yes, but something's wrong. The sounds are different now. Before, it sounded like they were searching, being somewhat careful. Now, it sounds more deliberate, like they know exactly what they're looking for." Through her earpiece, Sarah could hear muffled sounds from Lisa's end. What might have been furniture being moved more aggressively or drawers being pulled out completely and dumped. The sounds were more urgent now, less concerned with stealth. Unit 23. Caller reports change in suspect behavior. Sounds more urgent and less cautious than before. Copy. Dispatch. We're proceeding to the second floor. Building layout shows 3 apartments per floor. Lisa, I want you to listen carefully. Do the sounds seem to be getting closer to your bedroom? Yes. I think they're coming upstairs now. Oh God, I can hear footsteps on the stairs. The 3rd step from the top. It always creaks when someone steps on it. They just stepped on it. Sarah made a note of this detail. Local knowledge of the building's quirks suggested either someone familiar with the location or someone who had been observing it for some time. This supported her growing suspicion that this wasn't a random crime. Unit 23. Caller reports suspects moving to 2nd floor. She has specific knowledge of stair creaks that suspects are triggering. Unit 23 reached the 2nd floor and reported their status. Dispatch, we're on the 2nd floor now. 3 apartment doors. A, B, and C. Door to apartment 3B is standing slightly ajar. This information created a significant discrepancy that Sarah needed to address immediately with Lisa. Lisa, the officers are reporting that your apartment door is open. Did you leave it open when you went to hide? No, absolutely not. I locked it behind me when I heard them breaking in downstairs. I specifically remember turning the deadbolt and engaging the chain lock. The contradiction was deeply troubling. Either Lisa was mistaken about locking the door, or someone had unlocked it from inside the apartment. The chain lock detail was particularly concerning. Those could only be disengaged from inside. Unit 23, be advised there's a discrepancy about the apartment door. Caller states she locked both deadbolt and chain lock when she hid. Proceed with extreme caution. Subjects may be inside the apartment. Officer Rodriguez's voice came through with heightened alertness. Copy, dispatch. We're prepared for subjects inside the apartment. Can you maintain contact with the caller? Affirmative, Unit 23. Lisa, I need you to stay completely silent now. The officers are about to enter your apartment. Don't make any sound until they call out to you directly. Through the phone, Sarah could hear what sounded like footsteps moving through the apartment below Lisa's hiding position. But now she could also hear the officers' movements through the radio, and they didn't seem to match what Lisa was describing. Sarah's experience told her that something fundamental about this situation wasn't adding up. The timing, the behavior patterns, the conflicting information about the door, all of it suggested complexities that went beyond a straightforward home invasion. Unit 23 reported their entry into apartment 3B. Dispatch, we're inside the apartment. Living room shows clear signs of search activity. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, papers scattered. But something's unusual about the search pattern. What do you mean, Unit 23? The destruction is very systematic. Electronics are untouched, jewelry box is unopened, obvious valuables are ignored. This looks like someone searching for something specific, not general theft. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Targeted searches often indicated that the perpetrators had inside information about the victim. They knew exactly what they were looking for and possibly where it might be found. Unit 23, any signs of the subjects currently in the apartment? We're hearing movement from what appears to be the bedroom area, but we can't get visual confirmation. Moving to investigate. Lisa's voice came through the phone in an urgent whisper. They're right outside the bedroom door now. I can see shadows moving under the door crack. But Unit 23 was reporting that they were the ones approaching the bedroom door. The timing should have matched, but Sarah's instincts were screaming that something was wrong with the coordination. Lisa, are you certain about what you're seeing? The officers should be the ones outside your bedroom now. No, Lisa whispered frantically. These aren't police officers. I can hear the officers talking on their radios in the hallway, but there are different people right outside my bedroom door. There are more people in here than just the police. Sarah's blood ran cold. If Lisa was correct, it meant the intruders were still in the apartment and had managed to avoid detection by the officers, possibly by hiding in areas the officers hadn't yet searched. Unit 23, be advised that the caller reports hearing movement in the bedroom area that is distinct from your location. Possible multiple subjects still in the apartment. Copy. Dispatch. We're at the bedroom door now. Door is closed and locked from the inside. We can hear muffled sounds from inside the room. Officer Rodriguez called out through the bedroom door. Ma'am, this is Officer Rodriguez with Metro West Police Department. We're here to help you. Can you hear me? Through the phone, Sarah heard Lisa respond, but her voice was filled with confusion and terror. I can hear you in the hallway, but there are still people in the bedroom with me. I can see their feet under the closet door. They're just standing there. The situation was becoming increasingly surreal. Sarah needed to establish exactly where everyone was located and resolve the apparent contradictions in the information she was receiving. Unit 23, are you certain the bedroom is secure, except for the closet area where the caller is hiding? Dispatch, we're going to have to break down this bedroom door. It's definitely locked from the inside. Stand by. Sarah could hear the sound of the door being forced through both the radio and the phone. The crack of splintering wood was followed by Officer Rodriguez's voice calling into the room. Ma'am, we're police officers. You can come out now. The apartment is secure. but Lisa's response through the phone was barely audible. The people who were in here, they're gone. But I don't understand how. I was watching the crack under the closet door the entire time, and I never saw them leave. Unit 23 helped Lisa out of the closet, and for the first time in over an hour, Sarah could hear her voice clearly without the muffled quality of the small space. "Thank God you're here," Lisa said to the officers, her voice shaking with relief and confusion. "But I don't understand what happened. There were definitely people in this room with me. I could see their shadows, hear them breathing, feel their presence." Officer Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with a note of concern. "Dispatch. We need to do a more comprehensive search of this apartment and possibly the entire building. The victim is adamant that subjects were present in the bedroom with her, but we found no physical evidence of anyone other than her." Sarah dispatched Unit 89 to assist with a building-wide search while keeping Lisa on the phone to gather more detailed information about her experience. "Lisa, I know this has been terrifying for you. Can you walk me through exactly what you experienced while you were hiding in the closet?" "It started maybe 20 minutes after I called you. I heard them come upstairs and enter the bedroom. They were moving around, opening dresser drawers, going through the closet where I keep my clothes. But they never tried to open the door to the walk-in closet where I was hiding." "Could you see them clearly?" "Not clearly, but I could see shadows moving around, blocking the light that comes under the door from the hallway, and I could hear them talking to each other very quietly. Sometimes they would pause right in front of the closet door, and I could see the shadows of their feet." Officer Rodriguez interjected from the scene. "Ma'am, when we entered the bedroom, we didn't find any evidence that anyone else had been in here recently. No disturbed dust patterns, no fingerprints on the dresser handles, no footprints on the carpet." This contradiction was becoming the central mystery of the call. Either Lisa was experiencing some kind of psychological episode brought on by grief and stress, or there was something happening that the physical evidence wasn't capturing. Unit 89 arrived with Officers Thompson and Martinez, both specialists in domestic violence and stalking cases. They began a methodical search of the entire building, looking for any signs of how intruders might have entered and exited without leaving conventional traces. "Unit 89, I want you to check all possible entry and exit points. Windows, fire escapes, basement access, roof access, anything that might explain how subjects could have avoided detection." The search took nearly 90 minutes and involved a complete examination of the building's structure. What they found challenged everyone's understanding of the situation. "Dispatch, Unit 89, reporting findings from building search. We need to revise our initial assessment of the entry point." "Go ahead, Unit 89. The damage to the front door that we initially attributed to tonight's break-in is actually old, probably a week or more. The wood around the lock has weathered, and there's accumulated dirt and debris in the cracks. This damage didn't happen tonight." Sarah felt pieces of a different puzzle beginning to form in her mind. "Unit 89, are you saying the door wasn't broken during tonight's incident?" "Correct, Dispatch. This damage happened some time ago and was never properly repaired. The door has been essentially unsecured for days, possibly longer." The implication was deeply disturbing. If the building's main entrance had been compromised for an extended period, it meant anyone could have been entering and leaving without detection. Lisa's apartment might have been accessed multiple times without her knowledge. "Unit 89, continue searching the building. Look for any signs of unauthorized occupancy or surveillance activity." 20 minutes later, Unit 89 made a discovery that transformed the entire investigation. "Dispatch, we found something significant in the basement storage area. Someone has been living down here." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Can you describe what you're finding? We've got a makeshift living space set up behind the building's furnace. Sleeping bag, camping equipment, food supplies, and, this is the concerning part, surveillance equipment. The scope of the situation was expanding rapidly. This wasn't a simple home invasion. It was evidence of a long-term stalking operation. What kind of surveillance equipment, Unit 89? Cameras, audio recording devices, and what appears to be monitoring equipment specifically designed to intercept communications from individual apartments. This is professional-grade stuff. Detective Martinez was immediately called to the scene to take over the investigation. As the department's specialist in stalking and harassment cases, she would be better equipped to process the evidence and determine the extent of the surveillance operation. Unit 89. Secure that area as a crime scene. No one else enters until Detective Martinez arrives. While waiting for the detective, Sarah continued gathering information from Lisa about any unusual experiences she might have had in recent weeks. Lisa, I need to ask you about the past few weeks since your husband's death. Have you noticed anything unusual? Items moved around, sounds at night, feelings of being watched? Actually, yes. I thought I was just being paranoid because of grief, but there have been things. Food disappearing from my refrigerator faster than I could eat it. My TV being on channels I never watch when I came home from work. Items in my bathroom arranged differently than how I left them. Each detail Lisa provided painted a clearer picture of long-term surveillance and unauthorized entry. Someone had been accessing her apartment regularly, studying her routines, and monitoring her activities. Have you noticed any patterns to when these things happened? Now that I think about it, it was usually on the days when I worked late or went out for errands. Like someone knew when I wouldn't be home. This suggested surveillance of her daily routine, and possibly electronic monitoring of her communications to track her schedule. Detective Martinez arrived at the scene and immediately began processing the basement area as a crime scene. What she found was more extensive than anyone had initially realized. Dispatch Detective Martinez on scene. The surveillance operation we've uncovered is far more sophisticated than initially reported. We're dealing with professional-level equipment and months of accumulated intelligence. Can you elaborate, Detective? The basement setup includes multiple camera feeds from different apartments in the building. Audio monitoring equipment capable of intercepting phone conversations, and detailed written logs documenting residents' daily routines. This operation has been ongoing for at least several months. The detective found journals documenting Lisa's activities in obsessive detail. Work schedule, shopping patterns, social activities, sleep habits, even records of visitors and phone calls. The stalker had been building a comprehensive profile of her life. The most disturbing aspect is that this surveillance appears to have begun before her husband's death. The earliest entries in the journals date back almost 4 months. This revelation meant that the stalker had been watching Lisa and her husband as a couple, then continued and intensified the surveillance after her husband's death when she became more vulnerable. Detective? Any indication of what the stalker's ultimate objective might have been? Based on the evidence, it appears they were planning direct contact or possibly abduction. There are detailed floor plans of her apartment, notes about her security measures, and what appears to be documentation of multiple practice runs for entering her unit. The practice runs explained Lisa's experiences with items being moved and food disappearing. The stalker had been entering her apartment repeatedly, testing her awareness levels and refining their access methods. The journals also contain extensive information about her husband's work schedule and routines. The stalker knew exactly when the husband would be home and when Lisa would be alone. Sarah felt sick thinking about how thoroughly Lisa's privacy had been violated. The woman had been living under constant surveillance without knowing it, even before experiencing the trauma of losing her husband. Detective Martinez continued her examination and found evidence that the stalker had been accessing Lisa's apartment as recently as that afternoon. We've got fresh footprints in the bedroom that don't match the victim's shoes, recent disturbance of personal items, and temperature readings from hidden monitoring devices indicating someone was in the apartment within the past few hours. This possibility explained the discrepancies in Lisa's account. She might have been hearing the stalker moving around while she was on the phone with Sarah, while the police were searching areas the stalker had already vacated. Detective, do we have any leads on the identity of this individual? We're processing fingerprints from the basement area, and the surveillance equipment contains digital storage that might include footage of the perpetrator. But based on the sophistication of this operation, we're likely dealing with someone with professional training in surveillance techniques. The investigation expanded to include other buildings in the area. If this stalker was targeting one victim so intensively, there was a strong possibility of other victims who hadn't yet realized they were being watched. Unit 47 was dispatched to canvass neighboring buildings, looking for similar signs of unauthorized access or surveillance equipment. Within 4 hours, they found evidence of surveillance operations at 5 other locations within a 6-block radius. Dispatch, we've got a significant pattern here. Multiple buildings show signs of long-term surveillance operations, and all the primary targets appear to be women living alone, particularly recent widows or divorcees. The case was rapidly evolving from a single stalking incident to a serial stalking investigation involving multiple victims across several city blocks. Sarah coordinated with dispatch centers in adjacent precincts to check for similar reports or patterns. This individual has been operating for months, possibly years, Detective Martinez reported. The level of organization and technical sophistication suggests extensive experience with surveillance operations. Lisa was immediately moved to a secure location while the investigation continued. The extent of the surveillance meant that her apartment was no longer safe, and there was no way to predict when or how the stalker might attempt direct contact. The psychological profile we're developing suggests someone with professional training in surveillance techniques, possibly former law enforcement, military, or private security background, Detective Martinez explained. They've been able to conduct extensive operations while avoiding detection by both victims and regular police patrols. Sarah coordinated with federal authorities as the multi-location surveillance pattern suggested the possibility of interstate activity. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted to help develop a comprehensive profile of the perpetrator. Based on the evidence pattern, this individual has been escalating their activities over time. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Rebecca Foster reported via conference call. The surveillance of Lisa Morrison was the most intensive we've documented, suggesting she may have been selected as a primary target for eventual direct contact or abduction. The timing of the escalation, coinciding with Lisa's husband's death, suggested that the stalker had been waiting for her to become more vulnerable and isolated. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the surveillance equipment revealed that it had been recording audio and video from Lisa's apartment for at least 8 weeks. The recordings captured intimate details of her daily life, private phone conversations with friends and family, and her personal grieving process. The violation of privacy goes far beyond physical surveillance, Detective Martinez noted in her report. This individual has recordings of her most private moments, including intimate conversations about her grief, financial concerns, and plans for the future. This level of intrusion represents one of the most severe stalking cases our department has encountered. The recordings also contained evidence that would help identify the stalker. Background noise, phone conversations conducted from the basement area, and recorded meetings with accomplices provided multiple opportunities for voice analysis and identification. We're working with the FBI's audio analysis lab to enhance the recordings and extract identifying information, Detective Martinez reported. We've already identified at least 3 distinct voices, suggesting this might be a coordinated operation involving multiple individuals. The possibility of multiple stalkers working together added another layer of complexity and danger to the case. Coordinated stalking operations were rare, but extremely dangerous, as they allowed for more comprehensive surveillance and made detection much more difficult. Sarah continued monitoring the investigation while handling other dispatch duties. The Henderson Street call had consumed most of her shift, but it was evolving into one of the most complex cases the department had handled. The most critical priority now is ensuring Lisa's safety while we work to identify and apprehend the stalkers, Detective Martinez emphasized. Based on the evidence, these individuals were clearly preparing for some kind of direct contact or confrontation. Her calling 911 tonight may have interrupted their plans and saved her from becoming a victim of kidnapping or worse. Lisa was placed in protective custody while the investigation continued. The extent of the surveillance and the sophisticated nature of the operation suggested that the stalkers would likely attempt to locate her if she remained in the area. We're also working with the other potential victims we've identified, Detective Martinez reported. They need to be informed of the surveillance and provided with security measures while we work to apprehend the perpetrators. The case made Sarah reflect deeply on the nature of emergency dispatch work. What had started as a seemingly straightforward home invasion call had revealed a complex criminal operation that had been ongoing for months without detection. It makes you wonder how many other calls we receive that seem routine, but are actually part of larger patterns we're not seeing, Sarah mentioned to her supervisor during debriefing. This stalker was so sophisticated they might have been operating for years before we discovered them. The investigation into what became known as the Henderson Street stalking ring continued for 6 months. The complexity of the evidence, the multiple crime scenes, and the need to coordinate with federal authorities made it one of the most resource-intensive investigations in the department's recent history. Eventually, 5 individuals were arrested in connection with the surveillance operations. The investigation revealed that they had been targeting women across 3 states, using similar techniques to establish long-term surveillance operations with the ultimate goal of abduction and human trafficking. The leader of the group was identified as Marcus Chen, a former military intelligence specialist who had been dishonorably discharged for misconduct involving unauthorized surveillance of civilian populations. He had recruited 4 accomplices with complementary technical skills to help establish and maintain the surveillance operations. The group was operating as a sophisticated criminal enterprise, FBI agent Thompson explained during the final briefing. They were preparing to escalate from surveillance to direct contact and abduction. Lisa Morrison's case was the most advanced in their pipeline. They had been preparing to make contact with her within days of when she called 911. The timing of Lisa's call, coinciding with their planned escalation, likely saved her from becoming a victim of kidnapping and forced into human trafficking. The group had detailed plans for approaching her, including psychological manipulation strategies designed to exploit her grief and isolation. The evidence suggests they had been using information gathered from surveillance to manipulate their victims' emotional states, Agent Thompson continued. In Lisa's case, they were planning to exploit her grief over her husband's death to gain her trust and create dependency. The psychological manipulation aspect of the case was particularly disturbing. The stalkers had been studying their victims' vulnerabilities and developing personalized approaches for each target, using their intimate knowledge of the women's lives to create seemingly coincidental encounters designed to build trust. Lisa testified during the trial about the ongoing impact of discovering she had been under surveillance for months without knowing it. The violation of her privacy during her most vulnerable time, while grieving her husband's death, had severe and lasting psychological effects. "I had to completely rebuild my life," Lisa said in her victim impact statement. "I moved across the country, changed my name, underwent extensive therapy, and still struggle with feelings of paranoia and violation. These people stole more than my privacy. They stole my sense of safety in the world." The case resulted in convictions for all 5 perpetrators. Marcus Chen received a 35-year federal sentence for conspiracy, stalking, and preparing to commit kidnapping with intent to commit human trafficking. His accomplices received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. But for Sarah, the case remained a defining moment in her career as a dispatcher. It taught her that emergency calls could reveal criminal operations of unprecedented sophistication, and that the quality of the initial response could determine whether victims received help or remained trapped in dangerous situations. "The Henderson Street case changed how I approach every call," Sarah reflected years later during a training session for new dispatchers. "You never know when what seems like a routine incident is actually part of something much larger and more dangerous." The case also led to significant changes in police department protocols for handling potential stalking cases. Dispatchers received additional training on recognizing patterns that might indicate long-term surveillance operations, and new procedures were implemented for coordinating with federal authorities when cases showed signs of organized criminal activity. "We learned that victims of sophisticated stalking operations often don't realize they're being watched," Sarah's supervisor noted during the post-case analysis. "The signs can be extremely subtle. Missing food, moved items, feelings of being watched that victims often dismiss as paranoia, or stress-related symptoms." The case file for the Henderson Street stalking ring eventually filled 12 storage boxes. The evidence included over 400 hours of surveillance recordings, more than 3,000 photographs documenting victims' daily routines, detailed journals spanning 18 months of observations, and sophisticated technical equipment worth an estimated $75,000. "It represents one of the most comprehensive stalking operations we've ever encountered," Detective Martinez said in her final report. "The level of planning, organization, and resource investment was more typical of organized crime or intelligence operations than traditional stalking cases." For Lisa Morrison, the case officially ended with the convictions, but the personal impact continued for years afterward. She relocated to Oregon, legally changed her name to Jennifer Walsh, and underwent 2 years of intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering how thoroughly her privacy had been violated. "The hardest part wasn't just knowing they had been watching me," she explained in a follow-up interview conducted by the FBI for training purposes. "It was realizing that they knew things about my grief, my most private moments of pain, and had been planning to use that knowledge to manipulate me. They turned my husband's death into a weapon against me." Sarah occasionally thought about Lisa, now Jennifer, and wondered how she was adapting to her new life. The Victim Services Coordinator had provided updates for the first year after the trial, reporting that Jennifer was slowly rebuilding her sense of security and had started a new career in a completely different field. "One of the things that haunts me about the case," Sarah confided to her partner during a quiet moment on a later shift, "is thinking about how long this had been going on without anyone noticing. If Lisa hadn't called 911 that night, how much longer might it have continued?" The Henderson Street case became a training example used by law enforcement agencies across the country. It demonstrated the importance of taking stalking reports seriously, conducting thorough investigations even when initial evidence seemed lacking, and understanding that modern surveillance technology could be used by criminals to conduct operations of unprecedented sophistication. The case taught us that we needed to expand our definition of what constitutes evidence in stalking cases, Detective Martinez explained during a national law enforcement conference. Traditional physical evidence like fingerprints and DNA might not be present, but digital evidence, behavioral patterns, and victim testimony can be equally valuable. The technical aspects of the surveillance operation led to new legislation in several states regarding the unauthorized use of surveillance equipment and invasion of privacy through electronic means. The Henderson Street case was cited in congressional hearings about the need for stronger federal laws addressing technological stalking. What made this case particularly dangerous, testified FBI Director Patricia Williams before a Senate subcommittee, was the combination of sophisticated surveillance technology with traditional predatory behavior. The perpetrators were able to gather intimate knowledge of their victims' lives and use that information to plan targeted approaches that would have been extremely difficult for the victims to recognize as manipulation. The psychological impact on the other victims discovered during the investigation varied significantly. Some, like Jennifer Walsh, required extensive therapy and life changes to recover. Others found that finally understanding what had been happening to them provided relief and closure. "I thought I was losing my mind," said Maria Santos, another victim who had been under surveillance for 14 months. "Little things kept happening that made me feel paranoid and crazy. Finding out that someone really had been watching me was almost a relief because it meant I wasn't imagining things." The community impact of the Henderson Street case extended far beyond the immediate victims. Residents of the affected neighborhoods reported increased anxiety about home security, and local security companies experienced a surge in demand for residential alarm systems and security cameras. The case changed how our entire community thinks about privacy and security, said Henderson Street resident Robert Chen, who lived 2 buildings away from Lisa's apartment. Into knowing that someone had been operating such an extensive surveillance operation right under our noses for months made everyone realize how vulnerable we really are. The Metro West Police Department implemented new community outreach programs focused on recognizing signs of stalking and surveillance. Sarah often participated in these programs, sharing her experience from the dispatcher's perspective and helping residents understand how to effectively communicate with emergency services during crisis situations. "The most important thing people learned from Henderson Street," Sarah would tell community groups, "is that if something feels wrong, you should trust your instincts and call for help." Lisa's willingness to call 911, even though she couldn't see the intruders clearly, probably saved her life and helped us uncover a criminal operation that was threatening multiple victims. The case also led to technological improvements in emergency dispatch systems. New software was developed to help dispatchers identify patterns across multiple calls that might indicate organized criminal activity, and enhanced recording systems were implemented to preserve evidence more effectively. Before Henderson Street, we might have handled Lisa's call as an isolated incident, explained Sarah's supervisor, Captain Robert Martinez. Now, we have systems in place to cross-reference similar calls and identify patterns that might indicate larger criminal operations. The training value of the Henderson Street case extended internationally. Law enforcement agencies in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia requested copies of the case files to help train their personnel in recognizing and investigating sophisticated stalking operations. The techniques used by the Henderson Street stalking ring were not unique to the United States, noted Royal Canadian Mounted Police Inspector Janet Wilson. "We've identified similar operations in multiple countries, suggesting that this type of organized stalking might be more common than previously realized." 5 years after the Henderson Street case, Sarah was promoted to training supervisor for the Metro West Dispatch Center. In her new role, she developed comprehensive training programs based on lessons learned from complex cases like Henderson Street. Every new dispatcher learns about Henderson Street during their first month of training, Sarah explained to a visiting delegation from another police department. It teaches them that emergency dispatch work is about more than just sending help to people in crisis. Sometimes we're the first line of defense against criminal operations that victims don't even realize they're caught up in. The case continued to generate research interest from academic institutions studying stalking behavior and criminal justice responses. Dr. Patricia Foster from the University of California published a comprehensive analysis of the Henderson Street case that became required reading in criminal justice programs nationwide. The Henderson Street case represents a paradigm shift in how we understand stalking behavior, Dr. Foster wrote in her analysis. It demonstrates that modern stalkers can use technology and organizational techniques to conduct operations that are far more sophisticated and dangerous than traditional stalking patterns. The long-term impact on Jennifer Walsh, formerly Lisa Morrison, became the subject of ongoing research into trauma recovery and victim services. Her case highlighted the need for specialized support services for victims of technological stalking and long-term surveillance. Traditional victim services programs weren't equipped to handle the unique trauma associated with discovering that your most private moments had been recorded and studied by strangers, explained Dr. Michael Thompson, a trauma specialist who worked with Jennifer during her recovery. We had to develop new therapeutic approaches specifically for victims of sophisticated surveillance operations. Jennifer eventually became an advocate for other stalking victims, working with victim services organizations to develop support programs for people who had experienced similar violations of privacy. Her advocacy work helped pass legislation in Oregon requiring the law enforcement agencies to receive specialized training in handling technological stalking cases. The Henderson Street case taught us that stalking is evolving with technology, Jennifer testified before the Oregon State Legislature. Law enforcement and victim services need to evolve as well to protect people from these new forms of predatory behavior. The technical evidence from the Henderson Street case contributed to advances in digital forensics and surveillance detection. New techniques were developed for identifying unauthorized surveillance equipment and tracing digital evidence back to perpetrators. The surveillance equipment recovered from Henderson Street was more sophisticated than anything we had seen in civilian criminal cases, explained FBI technical specialist Agent David Kim. Analyzing it taught us a lot about how criminals are adapting commercial surveillance technology for illegal purposes. The case also highlighted gaps in existing privacy laws and led to legislative efforts to strengthen protections against unauthorized surveillance. The Henderson Street Privacy Act, passed by the state legislature 2 years after the case, created new criminal penalties for using surveillance technology to monitor people without their consent. The Henderson Street case showed us that existing laws weren't adequate to address modern forms of stalking and invasion of privacy, explained State Senator Maria Rodriguez, who sponsored the legislation. We needed new legal tools to protect citizens from technological predators. The financial investigation into the Henderson Street stalking ring revealed connections to other criminal enterprises, including identity theft and fraud schemes. The perpetrators had been using information gathered through surveillance to commit additional crimes against their victims. They weren't just watching their victims, explained FBI financial crimes specialist Agent Carol Martinez. They were using the personal information they gathered to steal identities, open fraudulent credit accounts, and commit various forms of financial fraud. The total financial impact on victims exceeded $200,000. This discovery led to additional charges against the perpetrators and expanded the investigation to include federal financial crimes units. It also highlighted the need for victims to monitor their financial accounts and credit reports even after stalking operations are discovered and stopped. The Henderson Street case influenced emergency dispatch protocols beyond the Metro West Police Department. The International Association of Emergency Dispatchers developed new training materials based on the case, and similar protocols were adopted by dispatch centers across North America. Henderson Street taught us that dispatchers need to think like investigators, explained IAED Training Director Susan Wilson. We're not just taking calls and sending help. We're often the first people to recognize patterns that might indicate larger criminal operations. The case also led to improvements in interagency communication and information sharing. New systems were developed to help law enforcement agencies share information about potential surveillance operations across jurisdictional boundaries. One of the key lessons from Henderson Street was that sophisticated criminals don't respect jurisdictional boundaries, noted FBI Assistant Director Thomas Anderson. We needed better systems for sharing information and coordinating investigations across multiple agencies and states. 10 years after the Henderson Street case, Sarah was invited to speak at the National Emergency Dispatch Conference about her experience handling the call that uncovered the stalking ring. Her presentation became one of the most requested training materials in the dispatch community. The Henderson Street case taught me that every call has the potential to be significant, Sarah told the conference audience. You never know when a routine-sounding emergency call might be the key to uncovering a major criminal operation. The quality of our initial response can determine whether victims get help or remain trapped in dangerous situations. The case continued to influence victim services programs and therapeutic approaches for stalking victims. The unique trauma associated with long-term surveillance required specialized treatment methods that weren't widely available before Henderson Street brought attention to this type of victimization. Henderson Street showed us that victims of sophisticated stalking operations experience trauma that's different from traditional crime victims, explained Dr. Linda Foster, Director of the National Center for Stalking Victims. The violation of privacy, the loss of sense of safety, and the knowledge that intimate details of their lives were studied by strangers creates complex trauma that requires specialized treatment approaches. The research generated by the Henderson Street case contributed to better understanding of how stalkers select and monitor their victims. This knowledge helped develop prevention strategies and early warning systems for potential victims. We learned that stalkers often begin with what appears to be harmless observation, but escalate to more intrusive surveillance over time, explained criminologist Dr. Robert Chen. Understanding this escalation pattern helps us identify warning signs and intervene before situations become dangerous. The Henderson Street case also influenced architecture and urban planning discussions about building security and privacy protection. New construction standards were developed to make unauthorized surveillance more difficult and detection more likely. The case showed us that buildings designed without consideration for security and privacy can become vulnerable to sophisticated surveillance operations, explained security consultant Mark Thompson. We've developed new standards for residential and commercial construction that make unauthorized monitoring much more difficult. The long-term follow-up on the Henderson Street perpetrators revealed ongoing efforts to continue their criminal activities even from prison. Several attempts were made to contact former victims through intermediaries, leading to additional charges and extended sentences. These individuals represent a persistent threat even after conviction, warned FBI agent Patricia Wilson. Their sophisticated understanding of surveillance techniques and their obsessive focus on their victims means they continue to pose risks that require ongoing monitoring and security measures. The case influenced international cooperation efforts in combating technological stalking and surveillance crimes. The techniques developed for investigating the Henderson Street case were shared with law enforcement agencies worldwide through Interpol and other international organizations. Technological stalking is becoming a global problem that requires international cooperation to address effectively, explained Interpol cybercrime specialist Jean-Pierre Dubois. The Henderson Street case provided valuable insights that have helped law enforcement agencies in multiple countries investigate similar operations. 20 years after the Henderson Street case, Sarah retired from emergency dispatch work but continued to be involved in training programs and victim advocacy efforts. The case remained a defining experience of her career and continued to influence how she thought about emergency response and victim services. Henderson Street taught me that our work as emergency dispatchers extends far beyond the immediate crisis response, Sarah reflected in her retirement speech. Sometimes we're the only people who can recognize that what seems like an isolated incident is actually part of a larger pattern of criminal activity. The quality of our response in those moments can determine whether victims receive help or remain trapped in dangerous situations. The Henderson Street case file was eventually transferred to the FBI's Training Academy at Quantico, where it became part of the core curriculum for agents specializing in stalking and harassment cases. New FBI agents studied the case to learn about the complexities of modern stalking operations and the importance of thorough investigation techniques. Henderson Street remains one of the most instructive cases we use in training, explained FBI Training Director Agent Michael Davis. It demonstrates how sophisticated modern stalkers can be and how important it is for law enforcement to adapt our techniques to address these evolving threats. The case also influenced research into the psychological profiles of organized stalkers and the development of prevention strategies for potential victims. Understanding the methods used by the Henderson Street perpetrators helped researchers develop better ways to identify and protect vulnerable individuals. The Henderson Street case provided unprecedented insight into how organized stalking operations function, explained criminal psychologist Dr. Rebecca Martinez. The detailed records kept by the perpetrators gave us a unique window into their thought processes and methodologies, which has been invaluable for developing prevention and intervention strategies. The technological legacy of the Henderson Street case continued to influence law enforcement techniques and civilian security measures decades after the original investigation. The surveillance detection methods developed during the case became standard tools for investigating similar crimes. Henderson Street changed how law enforcement approaches technological crime scenes, explained digital forensics specialist Agent Karen Wilson. The techniques we developed for analyzing the surveillance equipment and digital evidence from that case are still being used in investigations today. For Jennifer Walsh, the former Lisa Morrison, the case remained a defining experience that shaped her life's work, advocating for stalking victims and privacy rights. She established a foundation dedicated to helping victims of technological stalking and supporting research into prevention and treatment methods. The Henderson Street case showed me that victims of sophisticated crimes need specialized support and advocacy, Jennifer explained during a foundation fundraising event. Traditional victim services weren't equipped to handle the unique trauma and ongoing security concerns associated with technological stalking. We needed to create new approaches and resources specifically for these victims. The Henderson Street case ultimately became recognized as a watershed moment in understanding modern stalking behavior and the law enforcement response to sophisticated criminal operations. It demonstrated that emergency dispatch work was evolving beyond simple crisis response to include complex investigative and victim protection responsibilities. Henderson Street taught us that the nature of emergency response was changing, reflected Captain Martinez. Sarah's former supervisor. Dispatchers were no longer just coordinators of immediate response, they were becoming the first line of defense against sophisticated criminal operations that victims might not even realize they were caught up in. The case continued to generate research, training materials, and policy discussions decades after the original investigation. It remained a powerful example of how a single emergency call could uncover criminal operations of unprecedented complexity, and how the quality of the initial response could determine whether victims received help or remained in danger. The Henderson Street call lasted officially for 2 hours and 17 minutes from initial contact to scene secure, but its investigation continued for months, and its impact lasted for decades. It demonstrated how emergency dispatch work had evolved to address new forms of criminal activity, and how dispatchers had become crucial partners in complex criminal investigations. For Sarah Chen, it remained the call that taught her the most about the true nature of emergency dispatch work. Not just responding to immediate crises, but sometimes uncovering hidden threats that could affect entire communities. The Henderson Street case would always be remembered as the night a routine home invasion call revealed one of the most sophisticated stalking operations in law enforcement history, and how one dispatcher's thorough response helped save multiple victims from a criminal enterprise that had been operating in plain sight for months without detection. The Riverside County Sheriff's Department Communications Center hummed with quiet activity at 11:42 p.m. on a frigid January night. Senior dispatcher Monica Rodriguez had been working emergency communications for 8 years, and she prided herself on being able to handle any situation that came through her headset. Tonight, however, would test every skill she had developed and introduce her to a case that would haunt law enforcement professionals for years to come. Monica adjusted her position in the ergonomic chair that had become her second home during countless overnight shifts. The dispatch center was a marvel of modern technology. Multiple high-definition monitors displayed real-time GPS tracking of all patrol units, emergency medical services, and fire department resources across Riverside County's 7,300 square miles of diverse terrain. The county encompassed everything from desert communities to mountain wilderness areas, suburban developments, and agricultural valleys, making emergency response coordination particularly challenging. Her sector tonight covered the eastern portion of the county, including the communities of Beaumont, Banning, Cabazon, and the vast wilderness areas extending toward the San Bernardino National Forest. 4 Sheriff's Patrol units were active in her coverage area. Units 847, 921, 654, and 703. Additionally, California Highway Patrol Unit 78 was working Interstate 10 through her sector, and Riverside County Fire Station 78 was on standby for medical emergencies. The night had been relatively quiet for a Friday evening in January. The cold weather, with temperatures dropping into the low 20s, had kept most people indoors. Monica had handled 2 minor traffic accidents, one domestic dispute that was resolved without arrests, a welfare check on an elderly resident that turned out to be a false alarm, and several routine security alarm calls that proved to be equipment malfunctions caused by the unusual cold. Monica's workstation was equipped with the latest computer-aided dispatch system, integrated with the California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System, the National Crime Information Center database, and real-time communication links with neighboring counties and federal agencies. Her primary monitor displayed a detailed map of her coverage area with GPS indicators for all emergency resources, while secondary monitors showed active call logs, weather conditions, and traffic information. The digital clock display read 11:42:17 p.m. when her emergency line received an incoming call. The system automatically displayed the caller's location through enhanced 911 technology, showing the call was originating from a cell phone with GPS coordinates placing it near Desert Hills Road, approximately 12 miles east of Beaumont, in a sparsely populated area known for horse properties and rural residential developments. Riverside County Sheriff's Communications. This is Monica. What's your emergency? The voice that responded was that of an older woman, clearly distraught and speaking rapidly with a slight tremor that suggested both anxiety and cold. My daughter is missing. She left for work this morning and never came home. I've been calling her phone all day and it goes straight to voicemail. This isn't like her at all. She always calls if she's going to be late. Monica immediately began entering information into her computer system while maintaining a calm, professional tone designed to gather essential details while reassuring the caller. Ma'am, I understand your concern. Can you give me your name and your daughter's information? My name is Patricia Hendricks. My daughter is Amanda Hendricks. She's 28 years old. She works at Riverside Community Hospital in the administrative offices. She left for work at 6:30 this morning, like she always does, and she was supposed to be home by 6 p.m. at the latest. Monica noted the time discrepancy. It was now nearly midnight, meaning Amanda had been missing for approximately 6 hours past her expected return time. While this wasn't necessarily alarming for an adult, the mother's concern suggested this was unusual behavior for Amanda. Mrs. Hendricks, what's your address and phone number so I can have an officer contact you? I'm at 45,820 Desert Hills Road. My phone number is 951-555-0847. Please, something terrible has happened to her. I can feel it. Monica entered the address into her system and immediately noticed several relevant details. The Hendricks property was located in a rural area with limited cell phone coverage, surrounded by vast expanses of undeveloped desert and mountainous terrain. The nearest neighbor was over half a mile away, and the property was accessible only by a single dirt road that connected to Desert Hills Road. Mrs. Hendricks, when was the last time you spoke with Amanda? She called me during her lunch break around noon. She sounded fine, normal. She said she was planning to stop at the grocery store after work and would be home by 6:30 at the latest. When she wasn't home by 7, I started calling her phone. It rang a few times at first, then started going straight to voicemail. This information provided a timeline that Monica found concerning. Cell phones typically went straight to voicemail when they were either turned off, had dead batteries, or were in areas with no cellular coverage. Given Amanda's apparent reliability and her mother's worry, the situation warranted immediate attention. Mrs. Hendricks, I'm going to have a deputy come out to speak with you and get more detailed information. Have you contacted Amanda's workplace or any of her friends? I called the hospital and spoke to her supervisor. Amanda never showed up for work today. She was scheduled to be there at 8 a.m., but she never arrived and never called in sick. That's when I knew something was wrong. Amanda has never missed work without calling. Monica felt her dispatcher instincts activate. A 28-year-old woman who had apparently left for work but never arrived, whose phone was now going straight to voicemail, and who had a pattern of reliable communication with her mother. This was shaping up to be a legitimate missing person case rather than a simple failure to communicate. Ma'am, I'm dispatching Deputy Williams from Unit 847 to your location right now. He should be there within 20 minutes. While we're waiting for him to arrive, can you give me a description of Amanda and the vehicle she was driving? Amanda is 5 feet 6 inches tall, about 130 pounds, with brown hair that she wears in a ponytail most days. She has hazel eyes and was wearing her work clothes, probably dark slacks and a blue blouse. She drives a 2019 white Honda Civic, license plate number 8 GFD 429. Monica immediately entered Amanda's description and vehicle information into the NCIC database and issued a regional BOLO, be on the lookout, alert to all law enforcement agencies in Southern California. The information would also be automatically shared with the California Highway Patrol and neighboring county sheriff's departments. Mrs. Hendricks, can you think of anywhere Amanda might have gone? Any friends, relatives, or places she visits regularly? She doesn't have many close friends here. We moved to Riverside County about 2 years ago from Los Angeles after my husband died. Amanda got the job at the hospital, and we bought this property because it was quiet and peaceful. She's been focused on work and helping me get settled. The isolation factor was concerning. New residents without established social networks were often more vulnerable to various types of crimes, and their disappearances might not be noticed as quickly by people outside their immediate family. Unit 847. Respond. Code 2 to 4. 5820 Desert Hills Road for a missing person report. 28-year-old female. Last seen leaving for work this morning. Failed to arrive at workplace. No contact with family since noon today. Deputy Robert Williams acknowledged the call immediately. Unit 847, en route to Desert Hills Road, ETA 15 minutes. Monica continued gathering information from Patricia Hendricks while monitoring Deputy Williams' progress toward the rural property. The GPS tracking showed him navigating the increasingly remote roads leading to the Desert Hills area. Mrs. Hendricks, does Amanda have any medical conditions, take any medications, or have any personal problems that might be relevant? She's been seeing a counselor since her father died, but she's been doing better lately. She takes medication for anxiety, but nothing that would impair her driving. She doesn't drink alcohol or use drugs. She's always been very responsible. Has she mentioned any problems at work? Any conflicts with coworkers or supervisors? Nothing specific, but she did mention that she thought someone had been going through her desk at work. She thought maybe it was the cleaning crew, but it bothered her enough that she started locking her personal items in her car instead of leaving them in her desk. This detail caught Monica's attention. Reports of personal space being violated often preceded more serious incidents, particularly when combined with other unusual circumstances. When did she mention this about her desk being searched? About 2 weeks ago. She also said she thought someone had been following her home from work one evening, but when she looked in her rearview mirror, she didn't see anyone. I told her she was probably just being paranoid because of the anxiety medication. But now I'm wondering if something really was wrong. Monica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the January weather. The combination of workplace surveillance, possible stalking behavior, and now a disappearance was forming a pattern that experienced dispatchers learned to recognize as potentially dangerous. Unit 847, be advised that the missing person may have been experiencing possible workplace harassment and potential stalking behavior prior to disappearance. Copy, dispatch. I'm about 5 minutes out from the residence. Monica continued the interview while making notes for the investigating deputy. Mrs. Hendricks, can you describe Amanda's normal route to work? She takes Desert Hills Road to Highway 79, then connects to Interstate 10 westbound to the Beaumont Avenue exit. From there, it's about 10 minutes to the hospital. The whole trip usually takes her about 45 minutes. Monica immediately began coordinating with other units to search Amanda's probable route. Unit 921, can you patrol Highway 79 between Desert Hills Road and Interstate 10, looking for a white 2019 Honda Civic, license 8GFD429. Unit 921, copy. Beginning patrol of Highway 79 now. Unit 654, check the Beaumont Avenue corridor and the hospital parking areas for the same vehicle. Unit 654, en route to hospital area. The systematic search of Amanda's likely travel route was standard protocol for missing person cases, but Monica's instincts were telling her this situation was more complex than a simple breakdown or accident. Deputy Williams arrived at the Hendricks property and immediately began a detailed interview with Patricia. Through her radio communication with him, Monica learned additional concerning details about Amanda's disappearance. Dispatch, Unit 847 on scene with reporting party. Mrs. Hendricks reports that Amanda's bed was not slept in last night, and personal items including her purse and house keys are missing, suggesting she did leave the residence as planned. However, I'm observing some unusual circumstances here. Go ahead, Unit 847. The property shows signs of recent surveillance. There are tire tracks in the dirt near the property entrance that don't match any of the family vehicles, and there are several cigarette butts that appear fresh near a location that would provide a clear view of the house and driveway. Monica felt her pulse quicken. Physical evidence of surveillance, combined with Amanda's earlier reports of feeling followed, created a pattern that suggested predatory behavior rather than a simple missing person case. Unit 847. Secure that area as a potential crime scene. I'm requesting Detective Davis to respond to your location. Copy, dispatch. I'll establish a perimeter around the surveillance evidence. Detective Sarah Davis was Riverside County's specialist in missing persons and stalking cases. Monica had worked with her on several complex investigations, and she knew that Detective Davis would bring both expertise and resources to the case that could make the difference between finding Amanda alive or becoming another unsolved disappearance. Detective Davis, respond to 45,820 Desert Hills Road. Missing person case with indicators of possible stalking and surveillance. Deputy Williams is on scene securing evidence. Detective Davis en route. ETA 30 minutes. While waiting for the detective to arrive, Monica coordinated additional search resources. Unit 703, respond to Riverside Community Hospital and interview Amanda Hendricks' supervisor and co-workers. Look for anyone who might have information about workplace harassment or unusual behavior from staff or visitors. Unit 703, copy. Responding to the hospital now. Monica also contacted the California Highway Patrol to request review of any traffic cameras along Amanda's probable route. Interstate 10 was heavily monitored, and if Amanda's vehicle had traveled that route, there might be photographic evidence of her departure time and whether she was being followed. CHP Unit 78, can you coordinate with your traffic division to review camera footage from this morning between 6:30 and 8:30 a.m. along Interstate 10 eastbound and westbound between Beaumont and Desert Center? CHP 78, I'll contact our Traffic Management Center and request immediate review of available footage. The search was expanding systematically, but Monica knew that time was critical in missing person cases. The first 24 hours were crucial for finding victims alive, and they were already approaching the 18-hour mark since Amanda had last been seen. Unit 921 reported finding no signs of Amanda's vehicle along Highway 79, but they had discovered something potentially significant. Dispatch, Unit 921. No sign of the Honda Civic along the highway, but I found a cell phone that appears to have been thrown from a moving vehicle near mile marker 15. It's damaged, but might be recoverable. Unit 921. Secure that phone as evidence and mark the exact location. That could be our victim's phone. The discovery of a potentially discarded cell phone significantly escalated the severity of the case. People didn't typically throw their phones from moving vehicles unless they were in distress or being forced to do so. Detective Davis arrived at the Hendricks property and immediately took control of the investigation. Through radio communication, Monica learned that the evidence of surveillance was more extensive than initially reported. Dispatch, Detective Davis on scene. we've got clear evidence of an organized surveillance operation here. Multiple observation points, professional-grade equipment impressions in the dirt, and what appears to be a systematic study of the victim's daily routine. Copy, Detective. What do you need from communications? I need you to contact the FBI's local field office. Based on the sophistication of this surveillance and the interstate nature of the victim's commute, we may be dealing with federal jurisdiction. Also, coordinate with our technical services unit to process the cell phone found by Unit 921. Monica immediately contacted the FBI's Riverside office and explained the situation to Special Agent Michael Torres, who specialized in kidnapping and interstate crime cases. Agent Torres, we have a missing person case that's showing indicators of organized criminal activity, professional surveillance, possible abduction, and evidence discarded along federal highway infrastructure. I'll have agents respond to assist with the investigation. Can you patch me through to Detective Davis? Monica connected the federal agent with the detective while continuing to coordinate the expanding search operation. Additional sheriff's units were being called in from adjacent sectors, and a search and rescue team was being assembled in case the investigation led to wilderness areas. Unit 654 reported from the hospital that Amanda's co-workers had noticed unusual activity in recent weeks. Dispatch Unit 654 at Riverside Community Hospital. Speaking with Amanda's supervisor and co-workers. They report several incidents of unauthorized persons in the administrative areas, security badge access attempts outside normal hours, and reports from staff about being followed in the parking structure. The pattern was becoming clearer and more disturbing. This wasn't a random abduction. It was the culmination of a systematic stalking and surveillance operation that had been targeting not just Amanda, but potentially other hospital employees as well. Unit 654, expand your interviews to include other hospital staff who may have experienced similar incidents. We may be dealing with a serial predator targeting healthcare workers. Monica contacted additional law enforcement resources, including the Riverside County Major Crimes Task Force and the Regional Fusion Center that coordinated intelligence sharing between multiple agencies. Major Crimes Task Force. This is Riverside Communications. We have an active kidnapping investigation that may be connected to a larger pattern of healthcare worker targeting. Requesting task force activation. The response was immediate. Communications, Task Force Commander Lieutenant Johnson responding. Will establish a command post at the hospital and coordinate with FBI resources. As the investigation expanded, Monica found herself coordinating between multiple agencies, dozens of field units, and specialized resources including K-9 teams, helicopter support, and technical surveillance units. Her role as dispatcher was evolving into that of a tactical coordinator for a major criminal investigation. The Technical Services Unit reported preliminary results from the damaged cell phone found by Unit 921. Communications Tech Services. The phone recovered on Highway 79 is confirmed to be registered to Amanda Hendricks. Preliminary data recovery shows her last outgoing call was at 6:47 a.m. to her mother's number, but the call failed to connect, possibly due to network congestion or interference. Any indication of incoming calls or text messages that might provide leads? We're recovering additional data, but there are indicators of GPS tracking software that was installed without the user's knowledge. This suggests the victim's movements were being monitored electronically in addition to physical surveillance. The discovery of unauthorized tracking software confirmed that Amanda had been the target of a sophisticated criminal operation. Monica immediately updated all involved agencies about this development. FBI agent Torres established communication with Monica from the scene. Communications agent Torres. We're treating this as a federal kidnapping case. The surveillance evidence suggests professional criminal activity, possibly connected to human trafficking organizations that target healthcare workers. Agent Torres, what resources do you need from the communications center? I need you to coordinate with fusion centers in adjacent states. This level of organization suggests we may be dealing with an interstate criminal network. Also, contact the National Center for Missing Adults and request immediate activation of alert systems. Monica began implementing the federal protocols for interstate kidnapping cases while maintaining coordination of local search efforts. The case was rapidly expanding beyond anything she had handled in her 8 years as a dispatcher. Unit 703 reported a significant development from their investigation at the hospital. Communications Unit 703. Hospital security has reviewed surveillance footage from their parking structure. We have video evidence of Amanda Hendricks being approached by unknown subjects in the parking garage at approximately 6:45 a.m. yesterday. Can you describe what the video shows? Subject appears to leave her vehicle normally, but is approached by 2 individuals who engage her in conversation. After a brief interaction, she appears to become distressed and is escorted back to her vehicle by the subjects. The video shows her vehicle leaving the parking structure with at least 1 additional person inside. This was the first direct evidence of Amanda's abduction and provided crucial information about the number of perpetrators involved and their method of operation. Unit 703, secure that video evidence and request hospital security to preserve all related footage from adjacent cameras and time periods. Detective Davis coordinated with FBI agents to analyze the hospital video evidence in detail. Communications, Detective Davis. Video analysis shows the subjects used a technique consistent with professional human trafficking operations. They approached the victim in a way that appeared casual to observers, but used psychological pressure and possibly threatened her family to gain compliance. The mention of threats against family members prompted Monica to coordinate additional security for Patricia Hendricks at the rural property. Unit 847 maintained security presence at the Hendricks residence. Based on investigation developments, family members may be at risk. Copy, communications. I'll establish a security perimeter and request additional backup. As the investigation continued through the early morning hours, Monica coordinated with multiple specialized units, including the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, which was developing a profile of the abduction operation. Communications. This is FBI Behavioral Analyst Dr. Rebecca Martinez. Based on the evidence pattern, we're dealing with a highly organized criminal enterprise that specifically targets healthcare workers. The surveillance operation, the electronic tracking, and the abduction method all suggest professional human trafficking activity. Dr. Martinez, do you have recommendations for expanding the search? We need to check for similar disappearances of healthcare workers throughout the region. This group likely has multiple victims, and they may be operating from a centralized location within driving distance of several major medical facilities. Monica immediately began coordinating with communication centers throughout Southern California to check for similar missing person cases involving healthcare workers. The response was both rapid and alarming. Communications, this is Orange County Sheriff's Communications. We have 3 similar cases in the past 6 months. All healthcare workers, all disappeared after leaving work. All had reported being followed or watched prior to disappearance. San Bernardino County Communications, reporting 2 similar cases, both involving nurses who disappeared from hospital parking areas. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Communications has 4 cases matching this pattern, including 1 victim who was found alive and provided information about an organized trafficking operation. The scope of the criminal enterprise was far larger than anyone had initially realized. Monica found herself coordinating a multi-county investigation involving dozens of law enforcement agencies and potentially more than a dozen victims. FBI agent Torres established a command post at the Riverside County Sheriff's headquarters and requested Monica to serve as the primary communications coordinator for the expanded investigation. Communications, Agent Torres. Based on the evidence we're developing, this appears to be one of the largest human trafficking operations we've encountered in Southern California. I need you to coordinate with the National Human Trafficking Hotline and activate all available federal resources. Monica contacted the National Human Trafficking Hotline and provided details about the Amanda Hendricks case and the related disappearances throughout the region. The response was immediate and comprehensive. Riverside Communications, this is National Trafficking Hotline Coordinator Jennifer Walsh. We're familiar with this pattern and have been tracking similar cases throughout the western United States. We're activating our emergency response protocol and coordinating with federal agencies nationwide. The case had evolved from a single missing person report to a federal investigation into a major human trafficking network that had been operating throughout multiple states. The breakthrough came when Los Angeles County detectives interviewed the survivor they had mentioned, a nurse who had escaped from the trafficking operation after being held for 3 weeks. Communications. This is LASD Detective Rodriguez. Our survivor victim has provided detailed information about the trafficking operation. She was held at a compound in the desert area east of Palm Springs, along with at least 6 other healthcare workers, including a woman matching Amanda Hendricks' description. Monica felt a surge of hope mixed with urgency. Detective Rodriguez, can you provide specific location information? The victim describes a remote compound accessed by dirt roads near the Salton Sea area. She escaped 2 days ago, but was afraid to contact authorities until she heard about the coordinated investigation. She's willing to guide rescue teams to the location. Agent Torres immediately coordinated with tactical teams from multiple agencies to plan a rescue operation. Communications, Agent Torres. We're assembling a joint task force for immediate tactical response. I need you to coordinate air support, medical resources, and backup units from all available agencies. Monica activated emergency protocols that brought together resources from across Southern California. Sheriff's departments, police agencies, FBI tactical teams, border patrol units, and medical helicopters were all coordinated for the rescue operation. All units, this is Riverside Communications. Operation Desert Rescue is now active. All participating agencies switched to tactical frequency Delta 7 for operational coordination. The rescued nurse, whose name was being protected for security reasons, provided detailed intelligence about the trafficking compound. Communications. The compound is heavily fortified with electronic surveillance, armed guards, and multiple buildings where victims are held. The operation appears to be run by a network with connections to international trafficking organizations. Monica coordinated with tactical commanders to develop an approach strategy that would maximize the chances of rescuing victims while minimizing the risk of harm to hostages or law enforcement personnel. Tactical Command, Communications. We have helicopter surveillance assets positioning for reconnaissance of the target area. Ground units are staging at predetermined locations for coordinated approach. The tactical operation began at dawn on Saturday morning, approximately 30 hours after Amanda Hendricks had first been reported missing. Monica monitored communications from dozens of tactical units as they approached the remote desert compound. Tactical Leader to Communications. We have visual confirmation of the compound, multiple buildings, several vehicles, and evidence of security measures including perimeter fencing and guard positions. Copy, Tactical Leader. Medical units are standing by for immediate evacuation of any victims requiring treatment. The tactical assault was swift and coordinated. Tactical Leader to Communications. compound secured. We have multiple suspects in custody and are locating victims now. Communications, Tactical Team Alpha. We've found 7 victims in the first building. All appear to be alive but requiring medical attention. Tactical Team Bravo, reporting 6 additional victims in the second building. Requesting immediate medical evacuation for 2 victims requiring urgent care. Communications, Tactical Team Charlie, additional victims located in a third building. Total victim count is now 15, including a woman matching Amanda Hendricks' description. Monica coordinated the medical evacuation of victims while maintaining communication with the tactical teams, securing the compound and processing evidence. The scale of the operation was unprecedented in her experience. Medical Flight 1, you have priority landing at the compound for evacuation of critical victims. Medical Flight 2, stand by for transport of additional victims to Riverside Community Hospital. Ground medical units, establish triage area at compound entrance for initial victim assessment. Amanda Hendricks was among the victims requiring immediate medical attention. She had been held captive for over 30 hours and showed signs of psychological trauma, but she was alive and expected to recover fully. Communications Detective Davis, Amanda Hendricks has been positively identified and is being transported to Riverside Community Hospital for medical evaluation. Her mother has been notified and is en route to the hospital. The rescue operation ultimately freed 15 victims who had been held at the compound, some for several months. The trafficking operation had been targeting healthcare workers throughout the western United States, using sophisticated surveillance and psychological manipulation techniques to identify and abduct victims. Agent Torres to Communications. This compound appears to have been the central hub for a trafficking network that was operating in at least 6 states. We've recovered evidence of dozens of additional victims who may have been transported to other locations. The investigation continued for weeks as federal agents processed evidence from the compound and tracked the connections of the trafficking network to other criminal organizations. Monica found herself continuing to coordinate communications for what became one of the largest human trafficking investigations in California history. The perpetrators included 12 individuals who were charged with federal kidnapping, human trafficking, and organized crime violations. The leader of the operation was identified as Marcus Volkov, a former military contractor who had been recruiting accomplices with specialized skills in surveillance, security, and transportation. Communications, Agent Torres. Final briefing on Operation Desert Rescue. We've identified and dismantled a trafficking network that was responsible for at least 47 kidnappings across 6 states over the past 2 years. Amanda Hendricks' disappearance provided the break we needed to locate and rescue multiple victims. Amanda's recovery was complete within several weeks, though she required ongoing counseling to deal with the psychological trauma of her abduction and captivity. She eventually returned to work at the hospital and became an advocate for improved security measures to protect healthcare workers. The most important thing people should understand, Amanda said during a training presentation for hospital staff, is that if something feels wrong, if you think someone is watching you or following you, trust your instincts and report it immediately. The criminals who targeted me had been studying my routine for weeks before they made their move. Patricia Hendricks credited Monica's thorough handling of her initial call with saving her daughter's life. If the dispatcher hadn't taken my concern seriously and immediately sent help, if she hadn't recognized the signs that this was more than just a simple missing person case, Amanda might never have been found. Monica received commendations from multiple law enforcement agencies for her coordination of the complex investigation that led to Amanda's rescue and the dismantling of the trafficking network. But for her, the most important outcome was knowing that 15 victims had been rescued and returned to their families. The Amanda Hendricks case taught me that every call has the potential to be the beginning of something much larger. Monica reflected during a training session for new dispatchers. You never know when a missing person report might be the key to uncovering a major criminal operation. The quality of our initial response can determine whether victims are found alive or become statistics. The case led to significant improvements in coordination between law enforcement agencies for missing person cases involving potential human trafficking. New protocols were developed for recognizing patterns that might indicate organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents. Operation Desert Rescue demonstrated the importance of treating each missing person case seriously and looking for connections to larger patterns, explained Sheriff's Captain David Martinez. The dispatcher's recognition that Amanda's disappearance showed signs of predatory behavior rather than typical missing person circumstances was crucial to the successful outcome. The trafficking network dismantled through the Amanda Hendricks investigation had been operating with sophisticated methods that included electronic surveillance, psychological profiling of victims, and coordination with criminal organizations in other countries. The case became a training example for law enforcement agencies nationwide. The Hendricks case showed us that human trafficking operations have become much more sophisticated and organized than many people realize, explained FBI Training Director Agent Patricia Williams. Dispatchers and first responders need to be trained to recognize the indicators that distinguish trafficking cases from other types of missing person reports. Monica continued working as a senior dispatcher for several more years before moving into training and supervisory roles. She often used the Amanda Hendricks case as an example of how dispatcher intuition and thorough investigation techniques could uncover major criminal operations. The case taught me to trust my instincts when something didn't feel right about a call, Monica would tell trainees. Amanda's mother's concern, combined with the evidence of workplace harassment and stalking behavior, created a pattern that experienced dispatchers learned to recognize as potentially dangerous. The long-term impact of Operation Desert Rescue extended far beyond the immediate rescue of 15 victims. The investigation led to the identification and prosecution of trafficking networks in multiple states and internationally, ultimately resulting in the rescue of more than 100 victims over the following 2 years. Amanda Hendricks eventually married one of the FBI agents who had worked on her case and became a national spokesperson for human trafficking awareness. She established a foundation dedicated to improving security measures for healthcare workers and providing support services for trafficking victims. The experience taught me that evil can be very sophisticated and organized, but it also taught me that law enforcement professionals are equally dedicated and capable, Amanda said during a congressional hearing on human trafficking. The dispatcher who took my mother's call, the detectives who investigated, the agents who rescued us, they represent the best of what people can be when they dedicate themselves to protecting others. For Monica Rodriguez, the Amanda Hendricks case remained the most significant experience of her career in emergency communications. It demonstrated how a single missing person call could uncover criminal operations of unprecedented scope and complexity, and how the quality of the initial dispatch response could determine whether victims lived or died. Every dispatcher should remember that we're often the first point of contact between victims and the justice system, Monica reflected during her retirement ceremony years later. The decisions we make in those first few minutes of a call can determine whether a case is solved or becomes another unsolved mystery. The Amanda Hendricks case taught me that our work is about much more than just answering phones and sending help. Sometimes we're the key to uncovering criminal operations that threaten entire communities. The case file for the Amanda Hendricks kidnapping and Operation Desert Rescue eventually filled an entire storage room at the FBI's Los Angeles headquarters. The evidence included thousands of hours of surveillance footage, detailed journals documenting victim selection and surveillance, sophisticated electronic equipment, and financial records linking the trafficking network to international criminal organizations. 15 years after Operation Desert Rescue, Monica was invited to speak at the International Association of Emergency Dispatchers' annual conference about her experience handling the call that led to one of the largest human trafficking rescues in U.S. history. The Amanda Hendricks case taught me that emergency dispatch work has evolved far beyond simply taking calls and sending help, Monica told the conference audience. We've become the first line of defense against sophisticated criminal operations that prey on vulnerable members of our communities. The quality of our response in those critical first moments can determine whether victims are rescued or remain trapped in situations that most people can't even imagine. The Amanda Hendricks case continued to influence law enforcement training and victim services programs decades after the original investigation. It remained a powerful example of how a single emergency call could uncover criminal operations that threatened communities across multiple states, and how dedicated law enforcement professionals working together could achieve remarkable results in protecting the vulnerable and bringing criminals to justice. The case ultimately led to the conviction of 23 individuals on federal charges related to human trafficking, kidnapping, and organized crime. The sentences ranged from 15 years to life in prison, with the operation's leader, Marcus Volkov, receiving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. But for Monica Rodriguez, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. Amanda Hendricks went home to her mother, and 14 other victims were returned to their families. In the end, that was what emergency dispatch work was really about: making sure that people in danger received help and that families torn apart by crime could be reunited. The Amanda Hendricks case would always be remembered as the missing person call that became a federal investigation, the single report that led to the rescue of 15 victims and the dismantling of a major criminal enterprise. For Monica, it remained proof that every call mattered. Every concern deserved serious attention, and every dispatcher had the potential to be the crucial link between victims and salvation. Years later, when new dispatchers asked Monica about the most important lesson she had learned during her career, she would always tell them about the night Patricia Hendricks called to report her daughter missing, and how taking that call seriously had led to one of the most successful rescue operations in law enforcement history. It was a reminder that in emergency communications, there was no such thing as a routine call, only opportunities to make a difference in the lives of people who desperately needed help. The Cumberland County Police Department Communications Center was eerily quiet at 12:47 a.m. on a foggy October night in rural Tennessee. Senior dispatcher Jake Thompson had been working the midnight shift for 5 years, and he had learned to appreciate the peaceful hours between midnight and dawn, when most of the county's 47,000 residents were safely asleep in their beds. Tonight, however, would shatter that peace and introduce him to a series of calls that would challenge everything he thought he knew about emergency dispatch work, and ultimately uncover one of the most dangerous domestic terrorism plots in the southeastern United States. Jake adjusted his headset and settled into his workstation. A sophisticated array of computers, radio equipment, and communication devices that connected him to every emergency resource in Cumberland County. The dispatch center was a state-of-the-art facility that had been upgraded 3 years earlier with federal Homeland Security grants, featuring redundant communication systems, encrypted channels for sensitive operations, and direct links to state and federal law enforcement databases. The center served not only the county sheriff's department, but also coordinated with the Tennessee Highway Patrol, local fire departments, emergency medical services, and neighboring counties when situations required mutual aid assistance. Cumberland County covered 682 square miles of diverse terrain in central Tennessee, including the rugged Cumberland Plateau, deep valleys carved by ancient rivers, dense forests that had never been fully mapped, and the winding Cumberland River that created natural barriers to emergency response. The geography made emergency response challenging, with some remote areas accessible only by narrow mountain roads that could take responders 30 minutes or more to reach during good weather. During adverse conditions like tonight's fog, response times could double or triple. The county seat of Crossville had a population of about 12,000 and served as the hub for emergency services. But much of the county consisted of rural communities, isolated farmsteads, hunting camps, and vast wilderness areas where cell phone coverage was spotty at best. Many residents lived miles from their nearest neighbors, relying on landline phones and CB radios for communication during emergencies. The isolation that attracted many people to Cumberland County also made them vulnerable to criminal activity and delayed emergency response. On this particular October night, a thick fog had settled over the entire region like a suffocating blanket, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet in many areas, and making travel treacherous on the winding mountain roads. The fog had rolled in around 10 p.m. and was expected to persist until dawn, creating hazardous conditions for the handful of people who had to travel during the overnight hours. The National Weather Service had issued a dense fog advisory that would remain in effect until sunrise, and Jake had already handled 2 minor traffic accidents caused by the poor visibility conditions. The fog was particularly dangerous in Cumberland County because many of the rural roads lacked guardrails, adequate lighting, or clear lane markings. Drivers unfamiliar with the area could easily become disoriented and drive off the road into ravines, creeks, or heavily wooded areas where they might not be found for days. Local residents knew to avoid unnecessary travel during such conditions, but the county still saw its share of accidents involving people who underestimated the dangers of mountain driving in zero visibility. His sector tonight included 5 patrol units covering the entire county. Units 12, 27, 34, 51, and 68. Unit 12 was staffed by Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran who knew every back road and hidden valley in the county. Unit 27 was Deputy Lisa Chen, newer to the department, but already proving herself capable of handling complex rural law enforcement situations. Unit 34 contained Deputy Robert Johnson and Deputy Patricia Martinez, partners who specialized in drug enforcement and had extensive knowledge of the remote areas where illegal activities often took place. Unit 51 was Deputy David Kim, working solo and covering the eastern portion of the county that bordered the Cherokee National Forest. Unit 68 was Deputy Sarah Williams, responsible for the southern sector that included several small communities and numerous isolated residences. Additionally, Tennessee Highway Patrol Unit 47 was working Interstate 40 through the county, dealing with the fog-related traffic hazards on the major east-west corridor that connected Nashville to Knoxville. 3 volunteer fire departments were on standby for emergency calls, though their response capabilities were significantly limited by the weather conditions. The fog had prompted an increase in patrol activity, with units positioned at strategic locations throughout the county to respond quickly to weather-related incidents and maintain a visible law enforcement presence in areas where criminal activity might increase due to the reduced visibility. Jake's workstation displayed a real-time map of the county with GPS tracking for all emergency units, current weather conditions updated every 15 minutes, road closure information from the State Transportation Department, and direct communication links with dispatch centers in adjacent counties. His primary responsibility was coordinating emergency response throughout the vast rural area, but on quiet nights like this, he often found himself serving as the county's lifeline for people facing everything from medical emergencies to domestic disputes to encounters with the abundant wildlife that called Cumberland County home. The digital clock on his console read 12:47:23 a.m. when his emergency line lit up with an incoming 911 call. The caller ID system showed the call was coming from a landline registered to a rural address on Plateau Road, approximately 25 miles southeast of Crossville in one of the county's most remote areas. Jake was familiar with Plateau Road. It was a narrow gravel road that wound through heavily forested terrain for nearly 8 miles, providing access to a handful of isolated properties where people valued their privacy and independence above all else. Cumberland County 911. This is Jake. What's your emergency? The voice that responded was that of an elderly man, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone that immediately put Jake on alert. After 5 years of overnight dispatching, Jake had developed an ear for distinguishing between routine complaints and genuine emergency situations. This caller's voice carried the tension and concern of someone who believed he was facing a real threat. There's someone on my property. I can see flashlights moving around near my barn. This is private property, and they have no business being here at this time of night, especially not in this fog. Jake began entering information into his computer system while maintaining his professional, calming tone. Rural property disputes and trespassing incidents were common in Cumberland County, where boundary lines were often unclear and hunting rights were taken seriously. However, they usually occurred during daylight hours and involved neighbors arguing about fence lines or hunters who had strayed onto private land. Nighttime trespassing with flashlights suggested either criminal activity or people who were lost and seeking shelter. Sir, can you give me your name and exact address? This is Harold Mitchell at 4847 Plateau Road. I live alone out here and I know every sound this property makes, every animal trail, every natural noise. These aren't animals and they're not lost hunters. Someone is prowling around my barn with flashlights and they're being real deliberate and quiet about it. Professional-like, if you know what I mean. Jake immediately pulled up the address in his system and noted several relevant details that painted a picture of extreme isolation and potential vulnerability. The Mitchell property was located in one of the most remote areas of Cumberland County, accessible only by a narrow gravel road that wound through dense forest for nearly 3 miles from the nearest paved road. The property consisted of 47 acres of mostly wooded land with a house, barn, and several outbuildings that Harold Mitchell had built over the decades he had lived there. The nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away through heavily forested terrain, and the property backed up to thousands of acres of undeveloped woodland that extended to the Cherokee National Forest boundary. Cell phone coverage was non-existent in the area, making Harold's landline his only reliable means of communication with the outside world. The isolation that Harold valued also made his property attractive to criminals who wanted to operate without being observed or interrupted. Mr. Mitchell, are you in a safe location right now? I'm in my house, looking out the kitchen window toward the barn. I can see the lights moving around systematically, like they're searching for something specific. The fog is so thick I can't make out how many people there are, but I count at least 3 separate light sources moving in coordination. I've got my rifle with me, but I'd rather have you boys come out here and check this out before things get out of hand. The mention of a firearm was concerning, but not unusual for rural Tennessee, where many residents kept weapons for protection against both human threats and dangerous wildlife. Jake made note of the armed homeowner's status and began coordinating a response while gathering additional information about the situation. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sending a deputy out to check on the situation. I need you to stay inside your house and don't confront these people yourself. Can you keep watching and let me know if you see anything else? Also, do you have any idea how these people might have accessed your property? I'll stay put and keep watching, but you better hurry. They're moving with purpose, not like kids looking for trouble or thieves grabbing whatever they can find. And to answer your question, there's only one way onto my property by vehicle, the gravel road that connects to Plateau Road. But there are several old logging trails and hunting paths that someone on foot could use if they knew the area well enough. How well do you know your neighbors? Could this be related to any disputes or problems you've had recently? I get along fine with my neighbors, what few there are. Haven't had any disputes with anyone. But I will tell you something that's been bothering me. Over the past couple of weeks, I've noticed signs that someone's been on my property when I wasn't home. Little things moved around. Footprints where they shouldn't be, that sort of thing. I thought maybe it was hunters scouting for deer season, but now I'm wondering if someone's been watching the place. This information triggered Jake's dispatcher instincts in a way that 5 years of experience had taught him to recognize and trust. The combination of prior surveillance activity and the current organized nighttime trespassing suggested something far more serious than routine criminal activity. Mr. Mitchell, when you say things have been moved around, can you be more specific about what you've noticed? Well, there's a tool shed behind my house where I keep equipment for maintaining the property. A couple of times recently, I've found tools that I know I put away clean were covered with mud, like someone had been using them. And there are tire tracks near my barn that don't match any of my vehicles. I thought maybe it was the propane delivery guy or someone like that, but those tracks are from a much larger truck than any delivery service would use. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. The pattern Harold was describing, reconnaissance, surveillance, and now organized nighttime activity, was consistent with criminal organizations conducting preliminary operations before major crimes like drug manufacturing, weapons trafficking, or even worse activities. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to have Deputy Chen respond to your location, but given the remoteness and the fog conditions, it's going to take her about 25 minutes to reach you. While we're waiting, I need you to tell me more about what you're seeing right now. They're gone from around the barn now. The lights disappeared back into the woods toward the back of my property, heading toward the old mine area. But Jake, I just noticed something that's got me real concerned. My barn door is standing wide open, and I know for certain I locked it up tight before dark. Someone has definitely been inside there. The escalation from trespassing to breaking and entering significantly changed the nature of the call and Jake's response priorities. He immediately updated the incident classification and began coordinating additional resources. Unit 27, respond. Code 224-847 Plateau Road for a breaking and entering in progress. Multiple suspects with flashlights have entered the victim's barn and are now moving toward mine shaft areas on the property. Homeowner is armed but cooperating. Use extreme caution due to fog conditions and remote location. Deputy Lisa Chen acknowledged the call immediately. Unit 27, en route to Plateau Road. ETA 25 minutes due to fog conditions. Can you get me more information about the property layout and potential hazards? Jake pulled up additional information about the Mitchell property from county records and emergency services databases. Unit 27, be advised the property is 47 acres with multiple outbuildings, dense forest, and abandoned mine shafts. Single access road, but suspects may be using old logging trails for escape routes. I'm also requesting backup due to the remote location and multiple suspects. Copy dispatch. Request Unit 34 as backup when available. Unit 34, respond to backup Unit 27 at 4847 Plateau Road, ETA en route. Unit 34, we're currently on the north side of the county. ETA 40 minutes due to fog and distance. Will coordinate approach with Unit 27. Jake continued monitoring Harold Mitchell while tracking Deputy Chen's progress through the winding mountain roads. The GPS showed her making steady but slow progress through the dense fog that was making navigation challenging even for experienced local officers who knew every curve and landmark. "Mr. Mitchell, Deputy Chen is on her way, but it's going to take about 25 minutes because of the fog. Can you tell me what you keep in your barn that someone might be interested in?" "Well, I've got farming equipment, tools, my ATV, some hunting gear, and—" Harold's voice trailed off, and Jake could hear him moving around, possibly to get a better view of his property. "Mr. Mitchell, are you still there? What else do you keep in the barn?" "Jake, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but I keep a substantial gun collection in a large safe in the barn. Hunting rifles, some collector pieces, and a fair amount of ammunition. If someone knew about that collection, it would certainly be worth breaking in for." The mention of a substantial gun collection immediately elevated the seriousness of the situation. Jake had handled enough rural burglaries to know that firearms were among the most sought-after targets for criminals, both for their resale value and their potential use in other crimes. "Mr. Mitchell, can you estimate how many firearms we're talking about?" "I've got about 20 rifles, a dozen handguns, and probably close to 10,000 rounds of various ammunition. It's all legal, properly registered where required, and stored in a heavy-duty gun safe that would take some serious equipment to break into." Jake felt his pulse quicken as the implications became clear. A collection of that size would be extremely valuable to criminals and would represent a significant threat to public safety if it fell into the wrong hands. The organized nature of the trespassing suddenly made much more sense. "Mr. Mitchell, I need you to check your house and make sure all your doors and windows are locked. If these people know about your gun collection, they may have been planning this operation for some time and could know that you live alone." "Already done that, Jake. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I've been living out here for 30 years, and I know how to protect myself. But something about this whole situation feels different from anything I've experienced before. These people seem to know exactly what they're doing." Jake began coordinating additional resources while maintaining contact with Harold. ATV theft was unfortunately common in rural areas, but firearms theft required immediate attention from specialized law enforcement units. Unit 27. Be advised that the victim reports a substantial firearms collection stored in the barn. This may be a targeted theft by individuals with specific knowledge of the property contents. Copy, dispatch. That explains the organized approach. I'm about 15 minutes out, but the fog is getting worse. Jake contacted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to report the potential firearms theft and request specialized support if needed. TBI duty officer, this is Cumberland County Communications. We have a breaking and entering in progress involving potential theft of a substantial firearms collection. Extremely hazardous conditions. Unit 51, I'm currently in the eastern sector, but I can respond. ETA 35 minutes. While coordinating the law enforcement response, Jake maintained contact with Harold Mitchell and continued gathering intelligence about the ongoing situation. "Mr. Mitchell, can you still see any activity on your property?" "The lights disappeared into the woods about 10 minutes ago, but I just heard something that's got me worried. Sounds like heavy equipment starting up somewhere back in the forest. If these people brought machinery to break into my gun safe, they're more organized than I initially thought." The sound of heavy equipment provided crucial tactical information and suggested that the criminal operation was indeed targeting Harold's firearms collection with sophisticated tools and planning. "Mr. Mitchell, can you determine the direction the equipment sounds are coming from?" "It's coming from the back of my property, near where the old mine shafts are located. There's a clearing back there that's big enough for vehicles, and it connects to some old mining roads that haven't been used in years but are still passable if you know where they are." Jake immediately realized that the criminals might be using the abandoned mining infrastructure to access and escape from Harold's property while avoiding detection on public roads. The old mining roads would provide numerous escape routes through terrain where patrol units would have difficulty following, especially in the current fog conditions. Unit 27. Be advised that suspects may be using old mining roads and abandoned mine infrastructure for access and escape routes. The victim reports heavy equipment sounds from the rear of his property near abandoned mine shafts. Copy, dispatch. I'm familiar with the old mining area. There are multiple roads back there that connect to several different highways. If they escape into that network, we could lose them entirely. Jake began coordinating with the Tennessee Highway Patrol to establish checkpoints on the highways that connected to the mining road network. THP Unit 47, can you coordinate checkpoint establishment on Highways 70, 127, and 68 in case suspects attempt to use mining roads for escape? THP 47, I'll coordinate with additional units to establish checkpoints. What should we be looking for? Heavy trucks or equipment haulers, possibly carrying stolen firearms and equipment. Suspects are highly organized and may be armed with recently stolen weapons. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex, with multiple potential escape routes, dangerous weather conditions, and the possibility of heavily armed suspects who had demonstrated sophisticated planning and execution capabilities. Deputy Chen reached Harold Mitchell's property and immediately encountered evidence that confirmed the organized nature of the criminal operation. Dispatch, Unit 27 on scene at the Mitchell property. I can confirm multiple vehicle tracks leading from the main road toward the barn area. The tracks appear to be from at least 2 large trucks, possibly including a trailer. Copy, Unit 27. Any sign of the suspects or their vehicles? Negative on visual contact, but I can hear machinery operating somewhere behind the property. It sounds like heavy cutting or drilling equipment. Jake felt his pulse quicken as the implications became clear. If the criminals were using industrial equipment to break into Harold's gun safe, they were likely to succeed in stealing the entire firearms collection. Unit 27. Do not approach the suspects alone. Wait for backup and coordinate your approach with Units 34 and 51. Copy, dispatch. I'm establishing a perimeter at the property entrance and monitoring the situation. Harold Mitchell reported developments that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Jake, I can see lights moving around my barn again, and it looks like they've got the barn doors wide open. I can also see what looks like a truck backed up to the barn entrance. Mr. Mitchell, are you still in a safe location in your house? Yes, I'm staying inside like you told me, but I've got a clear view of what's happening. Jake, these people know exactly what they're doing. They've got the barn lit up with portable lights, and I can see at least 4 or 5 people working with professional efficiency. The criminal operation was clearly succeeding, and Jake realized that law enforcement might arrive too late to prevent the theft. However, the intelligence being gathered was providing valuable information about the scope and sophistication of the criminal organization. Unit 27. The victim reports the suspects have the barn fully illuminated and are operating with at least 4 to 5 people and professional equipment. Copy, dispatch. I can see the light from the barn area, but I'm maintaining my position until backup arrives. Unit 34 arrived and coordinated with Deputy Chen to develop an approach strategy. Dispatch Unit 34 on scene with Unit 27. We're going to approach the property using the tree line for concealment and try to get visual on the suspect's operation. Copy. Units 27 and 34. Be extremely cautious. These suspects appear to be highly organized and may be prepared for law enforcement contact. Jake coordinated with additional agencies as the situation escalated beyond the capabilities of rural patrol units. TBI Agent Rodriguez. This is Cumberland County Communications. The firearms theft is actively in progress with multiple suspects using professional equipment. We need immediate tactical support. Cumberland County Agent Rodriguez. I'm en route with a tactical team. ETA 45 minutes. Can your units maintain surveillance without engaging until we arrive? We'll coordinate to maintain visual surveillance while avoiding confrontation until tactical support arrives. The next phase of the incident revealed the true scope of the criminal operation and its potential connections to larger threats. Deputies Chen and Martinez approached the Mitchell property using stealth techniques and night vision equipment, managing to get close enough to observe the suspect's activities in detail. Dispatch Unit 27. We have visual on the suspect's operation. This is much larger than initially reported. They've got the victim's gun safe loaded onto a trailer, and I count at least 6 individuals working with military-style coordination. Can you provide descriptions of the suspects or their vehicles? The vehicles appear to be commercial-grade trucks, possibly stolen given the professional nature of their operation. The suspects are wearing tactical gear and communicating with handheld radios. This looks like a paramilitary operation rather than typical criminal activity. Jake felt a chill as the implications of Deputy Chen's report became clear. The organized nature of the operation, the tactical equipment, and the military-style coordination suggested that Cumberland County might be dealing with something far more serious than ordinary criminals. Unit 27. Maintain surveillance but do not engage. I'm requesting federal assistance for what may be a domestic terrorism investigation. Jake immediately contacted the FBI's Nashville field office and reported the situation. FBI duty officer. This is Cumberland County Communications. We have an active firearms theft involving suspects using military tactics and equipment. This may be connected to domestic terrorism activity. Cumberland County, FBI Agent Sarah Martinez. We're familiar with reports of organized firearms thefts throughout the region. I'll have agents respond immediately with tactical support. The federal response was swift and comprehensive. Within minutes, Jake was coordinating with FBI agents, ATF investigators, and Tennessee Bureau of Investigation tactical teams as the incident evolved into a major federal investigation. Agent Martinez, can you provide intelligence about similar incidents in the region? We've been tracking a domestic terrorism network that's been systematically acquiring weapons and equipment throughout the rural Southeast. Your incident may be connected to this larger investigation. Jake found himself at the center of what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant law enforcement operations in Cumberland County's history. The simple trespassing call had uncovered evidence of organized criminal activity that appeared to have connections to domestic terrorism. Harold Mitchell continued providing crucial intelligence from his observation position. Jake, they're almost finished loading my gun safe, but I can see they're also taking other equipment from my barn. It looks like they're stealing everything that could be useful for some kind of military operation. Mr. Mitchell, what other equipment are they taking? Tools, camping gear, and what looks like some communications equipment I had stored out there. These people aren't just stealing to sell things, they're taking items that would be useful for some kind of organized operation. The pattern of theft suggested that the criminals were indeed connected to a larger organization with specific operational needs rather than ordinary theft for profit. Jake updated all responding agencies with this intelligence. All units, be advised that the suspects appear to be conducting systematic theft of items useful for paramilitary operations. This supports the domestic terrorism investigation angle. FBI agent Martinez arrived at the command post and immediately took control of the federal investigation aspects of the case. Communications, Agent Martinez on scene. We're treating this as part of a larger domestic terrorism investigation. The group responsible appears to be part of a network that's been systematically acquiring weapons and equipment throughout multiple states. Agent Martinez, what kind of coordination do you need from the communications center? I need you to coordinate with federal tactical teams, establish communication links with other field offices, and prepare for the possibility of multiple simultaneous operations as we track this network. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal agents traced the connections between the Cumberland County theft and similar incidents throughout the region. Jake found himself coordinating communications for what became a multi-state investigation involving dozens of federal agents and specialized tactical units. Communications. This is FBI Command Center in Nashville. We're activating Operation Mountain Shield to investigate and disrupt this domestic terrorism network. You'll be the primary coordination point for the Cumberland County aspects of the operation. FBI Command, what resources will be needed for extended operations? We're bringing in additional tactical teams, surveillance assets, and specialized investigators. This is going to be a complex, multi-day operation involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. The tactical teams positioned around Harold Mitchell's property reported that the suspects had completed their theft and were preparing to leave. Tactical Team Alpha. Suspects are loading final items and preparing to depart. They're using multiple escape routes through the mining road network. Tactical Command. Do we have units positioned to intercept? Negative. The fog conditions and multiple escape routes make interception extremely difficult. We're going to focus on surveillance and intelligence gathering to track them to their base of operations. The decision to follow, rather than intercept the suspects, proved to be crucial for the broader investigation. Federal agents used sophisticated surveillance techniques to track the criminals as they transported the stolen weapons and equipment to a remote compound located in the mountains of eastern Tennessee. Communications Surveillance Team Beta. We've followed the suspects to a compound approximately 30 miles east of your location. This appears to be a major base of operations for domestic terrorism activities. Can you describe what you're observing? Large compound with multiple buildings, extensive security measures, and evidence of military-style training activities. This is much larger than a simple criminal operation. Jake coordinated with federal command centers as the investigation expanded to include surveillance of the domestic terrorism compound and intelligence gathering about the network's activities throughout the region. FBI Command, what's the scope of the domestic terrorism investigation? Based on what we're uncovering, this network has been operating throughout at least 6 states, systematically acquiring weapons, equipment, and supplies for what appears to be a planned campaign of violence against government targets. The implications were staggering. Harold Mitchell's call about trespassers had uncovered a domestic terrorism network that posed a threat to law enforcement and civilian populations throughout the southeastern United States. Over the following days, Jake continued serving as the communications coordinator for Operation Mountain Shield, as federal agents gathered intelligence about the domestic terrorism network and planned coordinated raids to disrupt their activities. Communications Intelligence team reports that the network has been planning coordinated attacks on sheriff's departments, police stations, and federal buildings throughout the region. The weapons stolen from Harold Mitchell were intended to arm cells in multiple states. What's the timeline for their planned attacks? Intelligence suggests they were preparing for a coordinated campaign within the next few weeks. Harold Mitchell's call and our investigation may have prevented multiple terrorist attacks. The federal operation culminated in simultaneous raids on domestic terrorism compounds and safe houses in 6 states, resulting in the arrest of 43 individuals and the seizure of massive quantities of weapons, explosives, and terrorist planning materials. Communications, Operation Mountain Shield Final Report. 43 arrests, recovery of over 500 stolen firearms, seizure of explosives sufficient for multiple major attacks, and disruption of the largest domestic terrorism network discovered in the Southeast. Harold Mitchell's firearms collection was recovered intact, along with weapons and equipment stolen from dozens of other victims throughout the region. The investigation revealed that the domestic terrorism network had been systematically targeting rural properties with valuable firearms collections as part of their preparation for armed conflict against government forces. The most disturbing aspect of this case, FBI agent Martinez explained during the debriefing, is how close this network came to launching their planned attacks. The weapons stolen from Harold Mitchell were intended to arm terrorist cells that were preparing to conduct simultaneous attacks on law enforcement facilities throughout multiple states. Harold Mitchell was placed in protective custody during the investigation and prosecution phases, as the domestic terrorism network had maintained detailed intelligence files on law enforcement personnel and civilian witnesses who might testify against them. Mr. Mitchell's willingness to report suspicious activity and his detailed observations during the theft provided crucial intelligence that allowed us to track the terrorists to their base of operations, Agent Martinez noted in her report. Without his call and the dispatcher's coordinated response, this network might have succeeded in conducting devastating attacks. The case resulted in federal terrorism charges for all 43 suspects, with sentences ranging from 20 years to multiple life terms in prison. The network's leader, Marcus Webb, a former military explosives expert, received life sentences for terrorism, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to commit mass violence against government targets. Jake's handling of Harold Mitchell's initial call was recognized as crucial to uncovering the domestic terrorism plot. The dispatcher's recognition that this wasn't a typical trespassing case and his coordination of federal resources was essential to the successful outcome, FBI Director Patricia Williams noted during a commendation ceremony. But for Jake Thompson, the most important outcome was knowing that his thorough handling of what seemed like a routine complaint had prevented terrorist attacks that could have killed or injured hundreds of law enforcement officers and civilians throughout the region. The Harold Mitchell case taught me that in rural dispatching, you never know what a simple call might uncover, Jake reflected during a training session for new dispatchers years later. What seemed like an elderly man complaining about trespassers turned out to be the key to stopping one of the most dangerous domestic terrorism plots in our nation's recent history. The case led to significant improvements in information sharing between rural law enforcement agencies and federal terrorism investigators. New protocols were developed for recognizing patterns that might indicate domestic terrorism activity rather than routine criminal behavior, and enhanced communication systems were established to facilitate rapid coordination between local and federal agencies. Operation Mountain Shield demonstrated the critical importance of rural emergency dispatchers in national security, explained Department of Homeland Security Secretary Robert Martinez during a policy briefing. Local dispatchers are often the first to identify patterns and activities that might indicate terrorism threats, and their ability to coordinate effective responses can determine whether attacks are prevented or succeed. Jake continued working as a dispatcher for several more years before moving into training and emergency management roles. He developed comprehensive training programs based on lessons learned from the Mitchell case and similar incidents, helping prepare the next generation of dispatchers to recognize and respond to complex threats. The Mitchell case taught me that rural emergency dispatch work requires a unique set of skills and perspectives, Jake would tell trainees. We're often the only connection between isolated communities and law enforcement resources, and our ability to recognize patterns and coordinate complex responses can literally determine whether communities remain safe or become victims of criminal and terrorist violence. The domestic terrorism network dismantled through Jake's coordination of the Mitchell case had been planning what intelligence analysts described as the most ambitious domestic terrorism campaign in U.S. history. The group's plans had included simultaneous attacks on sheriff's departments in 12 states, coordinated ambushes of federal agents, and bombing campaigns targeting government buildings and infrastructure. The intelligence we recovered showed that this network was preparing for what they called Liberation Day, a coordinated campaign of violence designed to trigger armed uprising throughout rural America. FBI Assistant Director Michael Thompson testified before Congress. The dispatcher's handling of a single trespassing complaint prevented what could have been the most devastating domestic terrorism campaign in U.S. history. Harold Mitchell became a prominent advocate for rural security awareness and worked extensively with law enforcement agencies to help other rural residents recognize signs of criminal surveillance and terrorist activity. His experience transformed him from a private, isolated individual into a community leader who understood the importance of vigilance and cooperation with law enforcement. I never imagined that seeing some flashlights on my property would lead to uncovering a terrorism plot that threatened the entire country, Harold said during a community safety presentation to rural residents throughout Tennessee. It taught me that no matter how isolated we think we are, we're all connected, and we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other and report suspicious activity. The psychological impact of the case on Harold was significant but ultimately positive. Rather than making him fearful or paranoid, the experience reinforced his belief in the importance of community cooperation and vigilance. He worked with mental health professionals to process the trauma of discovering that his peaceful rural lifestyle had been targeted by domestic terrorists. But he channeled his experience into helping others understand the importance of security awareness. The hardest part wasn't the theft itself, Harold explained during interviews with FBI behavioral analysts. It was learning that these people had been watching me for weeks, studying my routines, planning to use my own weapons against innocent people, but knowing that my call helped stop them from hurting others. That gives meaning to what happened. The case had lasting impacts on rural law enforcement and emergency communications throughout the Southeast and eventually influenced national policy on domestic terrorism prevention. New training programs were developed to help dispatchers and officers recognize indicators of domestic terrorism activity, and improved communication systems were established to facilitate information sharing between agencies at all levels. The Mitchell case showed us that domestic terrorism doesn't just threaten major cities, explained Tennessee Emergency Management Director Colonel Robert Davis. Rural areas can be both targets and staging areas for extremist groups, and our communication and response systems need to be prepared for these threats. The technical aspects of the domestic terrorism investigation revealed sophisticated methods that the network had been using to avoid detection while conducting their operations. The terrorists had employed advanced surveillance techniques, encrypted communications, and detailed intelligence gathering to support their planned attacks. What made this network particularly dangerous, explained FBI Technical Analysis Director Dr. Patricia Foster, was their combination of military training, sophisticated technology, and detailed knowledge of rural areas where law enforcement resources are limited. They had developed methods for conducting operations that could have remained undetected indefinitely if not for Harold Mitchell's vigilance and Jake Thompson's coordinated response. The case led to the development of new technologies and techniques for detecting domestic terrorism activities in rural areas. Federal agencies worked with local law enforcement to establish monitoring systems and communication networks that could identify patterns of suspicious activity across large geographic areas. Operation Mountain Shield demonstrated the need for enhanced surveillance and intelligence-gathering capabilities in rural areas, explained Homeland Security Technology Director Agent Michael Rodriguez. We've developed new systems that help local dispatchers and officers recognize patterns that might indicate terrorism activity and coordinate rapid responses with federal resources. 5 years after the Mitchell case, Jake was promoted to Communications Supervisor for Cumberland County and developed comprehensive training programs based on lessons learned from complex cases like the domestic terrorism investigation. His training materials became widely used throughout Tennessee and eventually influenced emergency dispatch training nationwide. Every new dispatcher learns about the Mitchell case during their first month of training, Jake explained to a visiting delegation from the Department of Homeland Security. It teaches them that rural dispatching requires the ability to think beyond immediate emergency response and recognize patterns that might indicate larger threats to community safety. The case continued to influence federal domestic terrorism investigations and rural law enforcement practices throughout the country. The techniques developed for investigating the Mitchell case were shared with law enforcement agencies nationwide through FBI training programs and Department of Homeland Security resources. The Mitchell case provided a template for investigating domestic terrorism networks that operate in rural areas, explained FBI Training Director, Agent Lisa Chen. It demonstrated the importance of local knowledge, interagency coordination, and understanding that routine calls can sometimes uncover major threats to national security. Jake's role in coordinating the investigation earned him recognition from multiple federal agencies and eventually led to his appointment as Regional Emergency Communications Coordinator for Middle Tennessee. In this role, he worked to improve coordination between rural dispatch centers and federal agencies for complex investigations involving potential terrorism threats. The Mitchell case taught me that emergency dispatchers are often the first line of defense against threats that most people never see coming, Jake reflected during his appointment ceremony. Our ability to recognize patterns, coordinate resources, and maintain communication during complex operations can determine whether communities remain safe or become victims of criminal and terrorist violence. The long-term follow-up on the domestic terrorism network revealed ongoing efforts by affiliated groups to continue planning attacks against government targets. Several additional cells were discovered and disrupted through intelligence developed during the original Mitchell investigation, preventing multiple additional terrorist plots. The network we dismantled through Operation Mountain Shield was larger and more dangerous than we initially realized, warned FBI Counterterrorism Director Agent Patricia Williams. We've continued to discover affiliated groups and sympathizers who were prepared to carry out attacks if the original network had succeeded in their plans. The case influenced international cooperation efforts in combating domestic terrorism and rural criminal activity. The techniques developed for investigating the Mitchell case were shared with law enforcement agencies in other countries through Interpol and other international organizations. Domestic terrorism networks increasingly operate across national boundaries, sharing techniques, resources, and ideologies, explained Interpol counterterrorism specialist Jean-Pierre Dubois. The Mitchell case provided valuable insights that have helped law enforcement agencies in multiple countries investigate and disrupt similar networks. 10 years after the Mitchell case, Jake was invited to speak at the International Association of Emergency Dispatchers Conference about his experience coordinating the investigation that uncovered the domestic terrorism network. His presentation became one of the most requested training materials in the emergency communications community. The Mitchell case taught me that every call has the potential to be significant, Jake told the international conference audience. What seemed like a routine trespassing complaint turned out to be the key to stopping a major terrorist network. It's a reminder that in emergency communications, there's no such thing as an unimportant call, only opportunities to protect our communities from threats we might never see coming. The academic study of the Mitchell case contributed to better understanding of how domestic terrorism networks operate and how they can be detected and disrupted. Universities throughout the country use the case as a teaching example in criminal justice, emergency management, and homeland security programs. The Mitchell case represents a paradigm shift in understanding domestic terrorism threats, wrote Dr. Rebecca Martinez in her comprehensive analysis of the case. It demonstrated that modern domestic terrorism networks can be highly sophisticated and organized, but they can also be vulnerable to detection through careful observation and coordinated law enforcement response. The case also influenced research into the psychology of domestic terrorism and the development of prevention strategies for identifying and countering extremist recruitment and radicalization. The detailed records kept by the terrorists provided unprecedented insight into their thought processes and methodologies. The intelligence recovered during Operation Mountain Shield gave us a unique window into how domestic terrorism networks recruit members, plan operations, and prepare for armed conflict, explained criminal psychologist Dr. Michael Thompson. This intelligence has been invaluable for developing prevention and intervention strategies. Harold Mitchell's property was eventually sold, and he moved to a location closer to Crossville where he could be more involved in community security awareness efforts. However, he maintained the rural property as a training site for law enforcement agencies to practice responding to incidents in remote, challenging terrain. Harold's property became an important training resource for rural law enforcement throughout the region, explained Cumberland County Sheriff David Rodriguez. Officers could practice responding to incidents in fog, difficult terrain, and situations involving multiple suspects and complex crime scenes. The Mitchell Property Training Site was used extensively by federal agencies for exercises involving domestic terrorism scenarios, rural surveillance operations, and interagency coordination during complex investigations. The site provided realistic training conditions that helped prepare law enforcement officers for similar situations. The Mitchell property gives us the opportunity to train in conditions very similar to what officers encountered during the actual case, explained FBI Training Coordinator Agent Sarah Davis. It's an invaluable resource for preparing officers to recognize and respond to domestic terrorism threats in rural areas. 15 years after the Mitchell case, Jake retired from emergency communications, but continued to be involved in training programs and rural security initiatives. The case remained a defining experience of his career and continued to influence how he thought about emergency response and community protection. The Mitchell case taught me that emergency dispatchers have responsibilities that extend far beyond answering phones and sending help, Jake reflected during his retirement ceremony. Sometimes we're the crucial link between isolated communities and the resources they need to protect themselves from threats they don't even know exist. The case file for the Mitchell domestic terrorism investigation eventually filled an entire floor at FBI headquarters and became one of the most studied domestic terrorism cases in U.S. history. The evidence included thousands of hours of surveillance footage, detailed attack plans, sophisticated weapons caches, communications intercepts, and intelligence reports linking the network to extremist movements throughout the country and internationally. The Mitchell case represents one of the most successful domestic terrorism investigations in FBI history, explained FBI Director Patricia Williams during a congressional briefing. It demonstrated the effectiveness of coordination between local law enforcement and federal agencies in identifying and disrupting major terrorist threats. The case also led to significant improvements in rural security infrastructure and emergency response capabilities. Federal grants were provided to rural counties throughout the Southeast to upgrade communication systems, improve training for emergency personnel, and establish better coordination with federal agencies. The Mitchell case showed us that rural communities need enhanced security and communication capabilities to protect themselves from modern threats, explained Department of Homeland Security Secretary Robert Martinez. We've invested heavily in improving these capabilities based on lessons learned from Cumberland County's experience. For Harold Mitchell, the case remained a reminder that individual vigilance and community cooperation were essential for protecting rural communities from criminal and terrorist threats. He established a foundation that worked with law enforcement agencies and community organizations to improve security awareness and emergency response capabilities in isolated areas. The most important lesson from my experience, Harold testified before the Tennessee legislature during hearings on rural security funding, is that we're all responsible for protecting our communities. If I hadn't called 911 that night, if Jake hadn't coordinated such an effective response, this terrorism network might have succeeded in conducting attacks that could have killed hundreds of people. The Mitchell case ultimately led to new federal legislation strengthening penalties for domestic terrorism and improving resources for rural law enforcement agencies. The Harold Mitchell Rural Security Act provided funding for communication system upgrades, training programs, and coordination initiatives throughout rural America. The Mitchell case demonstrated that effective emergency communication systems are a critical component of national security, explained Homeland Security Policy Director Dr. Linda Foster during legislative hearings. The dispatcher's handling of that single call prevented what intelligence analysts believe could have been the most devastating domestic terrorism campaign in U.S. history. The international impact of the Mitchell case extended to law enforcement agencies and emergency services worldwide. The case became a training example for recognizing and responding to domestic terrorism threats, and the coordination techniques developed during the investigation were adopted by agencies in multiple countries. The Mitchell case provided a model for how local emergency services can effectively coordinate with federal agencies to investigate and disrupt major terrorist threats, explained Royal Canadian Mounted Police Commissioner Janet Wilson. We've incorporated lessons learned from Cumberland County into our own training and response protocols. 20 years after the Mitchell case, Jake Thompson was invited to speak at the National Emergency Dispatchers Conference about his experience coordinating the investigation that prevented one of the most dangerous domestic terrorism plots in U.S. history. His presentation continued to be one of the most requested training materials in the emergency communications community. The Mitchell case taught me that every call matters, every pattern is significant, and every dispatcher has the potential to be the crucial link between communities and the resources they need to stay safe, Jake told the conference audience. Harold Mitchell's willingness to report suspicious activity, combined with coordinated law enforcement response, prevented a terrorist campaign that could have changed the course of American history. The Harold Mitchell case continued to influence emergency dispatch training, domestic terrorism investigation techniques, and rural security policies decades after the original incident. It remained a powerful example of how a single emergency call could uncover threats to national security, and how skilled emergency communication professionals could coordinate complex responses that protected entire regions from devastating attacks. The case also highlighted the unique challenges and responsibilities of rural emergency dispatchers, who often serve as the primary connection between isolated communities and law enforcement resources. Jake's handling of the Mitchell call demonstrated that rural dispatchers needed specialized training and resources to effectively identify and respond to sophisticated, criminal, and terrorist threats. The Mitchell case showed us that rural emergency dispatchers are much more than coordinators of routine emergency response, explained International Association of Emergency Dispatchers Training Director Susan Wilson. They're often the first people to identify patterns and threats that could affect national security, and their ability to recognize and respond to these situations can determine whether communities remain safe or become victims of terrorist violence. The case remained a testament to the importance of individual vigilance, professional competence, and interagency cooperation in protecting communities from threats that most people never imagined could exist. For Jake Thompson, Harold Mitchell, and the countless law enforcement professionals who contributed to Operation Mountain Shield, the case served as a reminder that freedom and security required constant vigilance and the willingness of ordinary people to take extraordinary actions when circumstances demanded it. The Mitchell case would always be remembered as the trespassing call that became a domestic terrorism investigation, the single report that led to the arrest of 43 extremists and prevented what could have been the most devastating coordinated attack on American law enforcement in the nation's history. For Jake Thompson, it remained proof that rural emergency dispatchers were guardians of their communities and that their work was often the difference between safety and catastrophe for millions of people who would never know how close they had come to unimaginable danger. The legacy of the Mitchell case continued to influence American law enforcement, emergency services, and national security policy into the following decades. It stood as an enduring example of how ordinary people doing their jobs with skill and dedication could prevent extraordinary acts of evil and protect the communities they served from threats that existed in the shadows of rural America. For emergency dispatchers throughout the country, the Harold Mitchell case remained a source of inspiration and a reminder of the critical importance of their work. It demonstrated that their profession was about much more than answering phones and coordinating responses. Sometimes they were the thin line that stood between communities and those who would do them harm, and their vigilance and competence could determine whether evil succeeded or failed in its attempts to destroy the peace and security that Americans took for granted. The Mitchell case would forever be etched in the history of American law enforcement as the night when a rural dispatcher's skill and dedication prevented one of the most dangerous domestic terrorism plots ever conceived, and how the simple act of taking a concerned citizen's call seriously saved countless lives and preserved the safety of communities throughout the American Southeast.